Chapter 101, Achievement, Reward, Shadow Ring. Professor Snape's words made Dumbledore choke slightly, and then the headmaster burst into laughter. He shook his head, his smile unchanged, but a flicker of mischief in his eyes. Severus, when will you learn to temper that tongue of yours? Be careful, you'll frighten away the students you've been so carefully cultivating. Frighten away? Snape raised an eyebrow, a mocking curl at the corner of his mouth, and his gaze slid to Dylan, who was laughing uneasily. Good. It saves me time. If I'm teaching an idiot, why should they bother coming to me? They might as well go to Flitwick and play with his little wand tricks for children. Another voice cut in. Severus, a wand may be small, but like a potion, it contains infinite possibilities, as you well know. Professor Flitwick stepped in, short but imposing, with a gentle, sharp smile. He glanced first at Snape, then down at Quirrell on the floor. Seeing the turban gone, he hesitated at the back of Quirrell's head, pockmarked and twisted again after Voldemort's soul had been pulled away, looking sickened. Quirrell was the one who tried to steal the Philosopher's Stone? You've been talking here all this time. Aren't you going to do anything for him? Snape's face went cold. He isn't going to die. Leave him. He shot another look at Harry and Ron. And you lot, what are you doing here? Although his words addressed everyone, Snape's eyes were fixed on Harry. Harry, after spending so much time with Dylan, had picked up some of Dylan's odd turns of phrase. With the exams done and no homework to silence him, his mouth moved before his mind did, and he blurted out, "Funny mud go pee. We rushed over because we were worried Dylan would be hurt by Quirrell." Snape stared, utterly baffled. What? He frowned. What rubbish are you spouting? Some kind of spell? Has it made you lose the ability to speak sensibly? Dylan hadn't expected Harry to answer Snape like that, not in front of several professors. He fell silent, standing like a wooden post, hardly daring to breathe. He had once told Harry, half joking, "Harry, I declare you the king of Gryffindor," and explained what he meant. Harry never really understood the Chinese, but after Dylan's explanation, he liked the sound of the phrase and had repeated a few of Dylan's expressions with Ron. Under Snape's scrutiny, Harry had said one of those odd phrases without thinking and immediately covered his mouth. "No, nothing, Professor," he added quickly. Snape narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand the phrase, but he felt a tangle of regret, nervousness, and apprehension in Harry's mind. "What exactly are you?" "Really nothing, Professor," Harry hurriedly insisted. Hermione stepped forward. "Professor Dumbledore, what will you do with Quirrell? He tried to steal the stone. Won't the Ministry send him to Azkaban?" Dylan asked as well, frowning. "He was possessed by you-know-who, right? The two of them were tangled together. Now that Voldemort's soul is drawn out, is Quirrell going to die?" Dumbledore ignored the groaning figure on the floor for the moment and answered kindly, "Severus will deal with him. You should all leave for now." Then he turned to Snape. "Severus, take Quirrell down and bring the other teachers to my office." Dumbledore's words and Dylan's questions snapped Snape to full attention. "What? The Dark Lord? What do you mean?" he spat. Flitwick had overheard as he passed. Seeing the open door and Quirrell on the floor, it had become clear Quirrell was the thief. He had not expected that Quirrell had been possessed by you-know-who. The idea that they had been living alongside a remnant of Voldemort made Flitwick shiver. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "I had my suspicions about Quirrell, but I did not expect Tom Riddle's remnant to be hidden inside him." Snape's jaw tightened. "Did you stuff lemon sherbets and cockroach clusters into your brain when you hired him? When you were appointing a professor, didn't you examine him properly? How could you let someone like that into Hogwarts?" Hermione agreed inwardly. How could a professor be possessed by the Dark Lord? Had there been no proper vetting? She kept those thoughts in her head as the other professors argued. Dumbledore held up his hands. "Severus, calm down." Harry, however, couldn't help himself. "The Dark Lord really was using Quirrell? No wonder my scar hurts whenever he looks at me." "Did you recruit him on purpose, Professor?" Harry added directly. "You can't speak like that, Potter," Dumbledore chided, glancing between Snape and Harry. Dylan almost smothered a grin. Harry had said something rude, and yet not quite rude, and it was funny to watch. Dumbledore stroked his beard. "Potter, when did your words become sharper than Severus's?" This makes me suspect you're not James's son at all, if it weren't for the fact that I know Severus hasn't held anyone's hand. Snape snapped, counting the syllables as if each one hurt. Dumb. Door, Severus hissed. All right, I know, Dumbledore said, and fell silent as if the conversation had exhausted itself. He quickly told everyone to go to his office, and Dylan wanted nothing more than to hurry away and check the achievements he'd earned. He led Harry and the others out. On the way they met Professor McGonagall, racing past like the wind. She stopped abruptly when she saw them. You, she began, stunned. Dylan reminded her, Professor McGonagall, Headmaster Dumbledore wants all of you in his office. You should have received a message, right? McGonagall frowned, glanced at them, and without another word hurried on. Harry walked beside Dylan, still carrying the invisibility cloak Dylan had given him. Dylan, what just happened? Ron and Hermione looked between them. Dylan explained, I found someone had broken in by the door where Fluffy was kept. I didn't have time to alert you, so I bypassed the protections the professor set and went to the last room. I ran into Quirrell trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone. And then Professor Dumbledore appeared? Hermione asked. Dylan nodded. Yes, I didn't do anything. Dumbledore appeared and scared Voldemort away. Blimey, Dylan, you actually faced the Dark Lord alone? Ron said, still shocked. The headmaster was there. How can you say you faced him alone? It wasn't alone. Dumbledore was there, Dylan replied, then returned quickly to the Gryffindor common room. After greeting Hermione, he went up to the dormitory. I'm going to start reading, he told Harry and the others, and settled on his bed, propped against the pillow, pulling out a book. Voldemort's display of dark spells had given him new insights he wanted to study further. Harry and Ron exchanged glances. They wanted to press Dylan for more, but in the end nodded. We should go see Professor Dumbledore, Ron reminded Harry. Didn't he want to talk to you in his office before we left? It can wait a bit. Let's go with Hermione first, Harry said, and the two left the dormitory. When they were gone, Dylan set the book aside. He watched them leave, then turned his attention to the system screen. The small achievement icon was flashing insistently. He clicked it open. Attack Professor IV. Description. You actually did it. You used powerful damaging magic on your professor and tried to kill him. Truly impressive. Unlock requirement. Inflict bleeding on a Hogwarts professor. Achievement reward. 1 max level advanced spell. Finally, not another dark arts only reward, Dylan muttered, pleased. With Voldemort demonstrating so many dark spells to him, and coupled with his own max-level dark spells, he'd been able to pick up dark arts quickly. Now he was more interested in learning some light spells. He set that reward aside and checked the next achievement. Achievement: Philosopher's Stone. Owner. Description: in a struggle with the Dark Lord, you managed to take possession of the Philosopher's Stone. You are a powerful, ambitious, and selfish new generation Dark Lord. Unlock requirement: possess the Philosopher's Stone. Achievement reward: the Book of Abraham the Jew, hand-copied fragment. Dylan's mouth twitched. So briefly possessing it counts as possessing it, huh? The system's judgments were oddly human. The reward was anticlimactic, a fragmentary book related to the stone. Dylan sighed. He hadn't truly possessed the stone in any meaningful way. If he could really master it, transmuting lead into gold or researching the elixir of life, rewards might be grander. He shook his head and moved on. Achievement: I am the boss. Description: what if you're the Dark Lord the world fears? In the end, you still have to stand there and watch your dark spells perform acrobatics begging for the favor of this boss. Unlock requirement: make Lord Voldemort perform a 2.5-minute display of dark arts purely for you. Achievement reward: Shadow Ring. Magic Ring. The name conjured an image of a mage with a staff engaged in close combat. Dylan smacked his lips and extracted the item from the system. Item: Shadow Ring. Description: an evil ring. Wearing it will gradually corrupt your mind. The more you use it, the more it affects your sanity. Negative emotions will flood your thoughts, and frequent use increases the risk of falling to darkness. Ability: when worn, grants temporary perfect physical concealment, enhances mental power, and greatly improves resistance to mental interference from magic. Oh? Dylan blinked. He had not expected the ring to grant outright invisibility. That meant, I can save a lot of money, he grinned. Each invisibility cloak he had crafted cost 10,000 galleons. Avoiding that expense would add up. The ring also boosted mental power during use, exactly what he needed. His problem had been stamina for casting spells. Even Avada Kedavra couldn't be sustained 100 times in a row. The ring would help, though he wasn't sure by how much. Still, this reward was worthwhile. As for the negative effects, Dylan waved a hand. Huh? Negative effects? Where? Chapter 102. Tie a knot! What an evil spell! This book, Dylan claimed the reward for the Philosopher's Stone owner achievement. The instant he touched it, a weighty, ancient sensation washed over him. The cover, made from some unfamiliar material, showed the marks of time, but still retained a surprising resilience. He cradled it in his hands and flipped through a few pages. The volume was full of knowledge Dylan had never seen before. Although it was handwritten and incomplete, it recorded much ancient and startlingly novel wisdom. I might not have the Philosopher's Stone itself, he thought, but the knowledge of how to make one is worth far more. He didn't expect the Philosopher's Stone itself to be useful to him. What mattered was the research it could lead to, the possibility of creating an alchemical construct more powerful than the stone, without its dangerous side effects. I'll study it when I have time. Dylan slid the book into the system's spatial panel and turned to the next achievement reward. This continuous achievement is already at the 4th tier, and the reward is a max-level, high-tier spell. The Attacking Professor series should be finished, right? He stroked his chin and opened the system panel. He clicked the reward. A brilliant star blazed at the top of the interface, and his consciousness shifted. For a moment, he stood in a void of stars and flowing nebulae. One star above him burned with an almost unbearable clarity, as if it could illuminate the whole universe. This is what a max-level high-tier spell looks like. The light from the star had a different quality from the other spells he'd received. Clean, pure, and intensely focused. He was eager to see what spell it would grant. With a thought, the star streaked through the void like a meteor and plunged toward him with tremendous force. Boom! When it struck, a strange packet of knowledge drilled into his mind. A vision popped up, a group of men standing in front of him. Dylan raised his wand and sent a spell at them. Ah! Holy! The men convulsed as if in the grip of unimaginable agony. Faces contorted, features squeezed painfully, veins standing out on their foreheads. Sweat ran down their cheeks. Some clutched their lower bodies with both hands, doubled over, knees buckling. Others bowed their heads back and howled. A few yanked down their trousers and reached frantically inside, trying to stop whatever was happening. The expression of pain on every face was unmistakable. Message: Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level spell, Jinnicknot, Bullknot. Dylan swallowed hard, snapped his hands, and dispersed the vision. How can such a spell even exist? He muttered. He was bewildered. Why couldn't the system give him a respectable, non-malicious max-level spell? What knot? What are you going to tie in a knot? Even though he was only a first year and still developing, the phantom pain he'd seen in that illusion felt almost real. The spell was more brutal than anything he'd imagined, worse than the Unforgivable Curses. This is insane. The core mechanics and key points of the spell had been downloaded into his mind. He hadn't wanted this evil spell, but there was no choice. He'd mastered it. He steeled himself. Well, since it's here, I'll accept it. Every spell has its own kind of beauty. I just need time to understand it. Despite his misgivings, mastering another max-level spell expanded his knowledge. He thought wryly, if I ever face Lord Voldemort in his true form again, I might have a use for this. He wasn't even sure Voldemort still had a true body. Dylan didn't linger over the new spell or the Philosopher's Stone book. He returned to the other books beside him. There were still many dark arts references he wanted to cross-check. After unlocking the spell, insights poured from him like a spring. He spent the day organizing his notes and working late into the night. By the time he slept, Neville and Seamus had already returned to the dormitory, but Harry and Ron were still missing. It nagged at him. The first-year trouble that had revolved around the Philosopher's Stone was now over. The stone was back in Dumbledore's custody, so why were Harry and Ron still out? Dylan couldn't understand why Dumbledore hadn't just kept the stone on his person. What could be safer than the headmaster holding it himself? Now that the mad, psychopathic Voldemort had been driven off by Dumbledore, where had Harry and the others gone? He didn't wait for them. He cast Scourgify and a deep sleep charm on himself and slept hard. Early the next morning, Dylan woke, stretched, and packed his things to go to breakfast and then the library. On his way out, he bumped into Professor McGonagall, immaculate as always. "Professor, what are you doing here?" Dylan asked. The Gryffindor common room wasn't usually visited by teachers, too many interruptions for the students' rest. "You slept well," McGonagall said, wand in one hand, adjusting her hair with the other. She rose and started toward the door. "I've just finished the examinations and thought I'd take a rare morning to rest. I usually wake much earlier." "Come with me to the hospital wing. Potter has fainted," she said suddenly. Dylan froze. "What? How did that happen?" He followed her hurriedly. McGonagall's face had tightened. "I was told by Weasley that after they separated from you yesterday, they went toward the headmaster's office." "But the headmaster was already speaking with some of us," Dylan supplied. She glanced at him. "So they wandered the school and encountered you-know-who was trying to escape. Potter and his friends chased after him, which provoked you-know-who. Though he couldn't touch Harry, he struck Weasley and Granger. In order to protect them, Harry fought you-know-who. By the time the other professors and I arrived, you-know-who had retreated, and Potter had collapsed." Dylan's expression tightened. McGonagall's tone shifted. "I've been told of your actions yesterday. You really have courage, daring to enter a forbidden area by yourself and even confront you-know-who. Do you want to take Potter's place and become the hero?" Her accusation chilled him. He nearly stumbled. He forced a smile. "I actually knew about the whole thing. Harry and the others never hide things from me. So when I saw someone enter that room, I didn't have time to alert anyone else. Do you realize what would have happened if the headmaster hadn't been there? You could have been killed." McGonagall's voice was stern. "It seems I've taught you for nothing." Dylan felt a flash of panic. Why bring this up now? He hurried to explain. "Although I couldn't notify anyone, Potter and the others would have told you. I expected the professors would follow. I only went to check first. And I was wearing an invisibility cloak. That made me bolder." "Bolder? You were outrageously reckless." McGonagall snorted, but then her expression softened. She recalled that Harry and his friends had indeed come to her about the stone. She had dismissed the warnings of a group of first-years, and that lapse in judgment had nearly led to disaster. Luckily, Dumbledore had arrived in time. Dylan felt the faint, guilty ripple of emotion from McGonagall. He'd honed his legilimency until he could read such subtle feeling. At level 9, his legilimency was nearly Snape level. Snape was probably at the maximum, but one level's difference was still huge. He didn't use the skill aggressively, but he could perceive emotions as well as the professors could. He paused, then said, "Headmaster Dumbledore probably already suspected Quirrell. With his precautions, it couldn't have been much worse than this. Actually," he added softly, "this is the best possible outcome, isn't it, Professor?" McGonagall blinked, taken aback at being read so clearly. Dylan smiled sheepishly. "Professor Snape taught me legilimency, and I've become quite proficient, more confident with legilimency than with transfiguration." McGonagall shot him a side glance. "It seems you prefer to be taught by Professor Snape." Dylan's face fell. "Please don't say that. I like every one of you professors, except the ones who teach history of magic and defense against the dark arts," he didn't say. McGonagall snorted again, more fondly this time. Dylan kept his head down and followed her to the hospital wing in silence. Near the entrance, Ron and Hermione sat waiting. Madame Pomfrey had refused to allow them in, not wanting to disturb Harry. When they saw Dylan, both rushed to him. "What happened?" Dylan asked, eyeing them closely. Ron started to stammer and then stopped. McGonagall was nearby. "Madame Pomfrey says Potter is all right. You can wait here and then go to breakfast," McGonagall said and turned away. As soon as she left, Hermione began to speak, but Ron cut in. "It's the Dark Lord. He had a backup plan." Dylan's eyes widened. "A backup plan?" Hermione explained. "After we were waiting for the headmaster yesterday, we wandered and unexpectedly ran into Lord Voldemort. He was trying to get to Ron's rat." "Don't call him that," Ron hissed. "You nearly killed me yesterday. How did he meet Scabbers?" I don't know. Scabbers has looked terrible lately, sick and exhausted. I've been taking him to Madame Pomfrey now and then. I don't know how he got out. And then he met Lord Voldemort, Hermione said. Ron scowled at her, then turned back to Dylan, eyes wide. Why would he go after my rat? Did he want to possess Scabbers? Dylan paused. Maybe he wanted to set a record, be the first Dark Lord to turn into a rat. Ron blinked. Huh? Is that possible? For a moment after Dylan said it, something in his mind, the mental filter he kept against Voldemort, seemed to crack. Chapter 103. Oh, Principal, I am so grateful to you. So in the end, when Harry was protecting you two, the power that erupted from the scar on his forehead drove Lord Voldemort away? Dylan looked between Hermione and Ron. They both nodded. All the professors know about this, right? Dylan raised an eyebrow. The headmaster knows. We only told him the essential details, but Dumbledore has likely already informed the other professors, Hermione said. Right. Dylan turned to stare at the hospital wing door, still shut tight. We can't go in? Madame Pomfrey won't let us, Ron replied. Dylan's mouth twitched. Then why did Professor McGonagall bring me here? Hermione and Ron exchanged glances and then looked back at him. Because Harry fainted, Dylan froze for a beat, then waved a hand. All right, I know. Don't worry, I think Harry will wake up soon. He started to leave. I still have some books I want to read today. You two should get something to eat. You must be exhausted after all this. Ron's eyes blinked slowly. But Harry is still here. I know, but with Madame Pomfrey taking care of him, do you think staying here will help? Hermione pursed her lips. You have a point. Right? Dylan smiled. Come eat with me, then I'll go to the library. If Harry wakes up, come find me there. I'll be glad to hear he's better. Ron scratched his head at the odd phrasing, but was already too tired to argue. The events of the past 2 nights and Harry's fainting had kept him up. He'd been waiting by the door the whole time and just couldn't keep his eyes open. Let's go eat. I'm starving. He tugged Dylan's sleeve and they left, Hermione glancing back at the closed hospital wing door before following. Dylan spent the day in the library. No one came looking for him. He didn't know if Ron and Hermione had slept all day. When he returned in the evening, Ron was still curled up in bed. Dylan tidied a bit and turned in early. He hadn't attended classes that day. Part of it was genuine. He wanted time to read, and he'd learned a lot. Part was practical. The professors were all preoccupied after exams and with other matters, and with Quirrell still alive, they had more pressing things to handle. It felt inconvenient to bother them. Another morning passed. Dylan got up as usual. Ron was still sleeping. Has he been terrified out of his wits by you-know-who? He muttered. Dylan clicked his tongue, then left for breakfast. Before heading to the Great Hall, he stopped at the Owlery to feed Luna a few meat strips. After a year at Hogwarts, his resources had improved. He no longer had to ration premium strips. He could lavish them on Luna 3 meals a day if he wanted. Afterward, he ate and then returned to the library. That morning, Ron came running in. Harry's awake. Dylan looked up from his books. Ron nodded eagerly. Let's go see him. Dylan hadn't really planned on it. If Harry healed, fine. If not, there was nothing he could do. But Ron looked so keen, and visiting a friend in the hospital wing was normal, so he followed. Harry was propped up on the bed, pale and small, looking quite fragile. Oh, you poor thing, Dylan said and sat on the stool beside him. How are you feeling? Okay, Harry replied weakly. Tired. I keep wanting to sleep. You slept a day and 2 nights, Ron said, eyes wide. Hermione, relieved to see Harry awake, scolded him softly. Sleep if you must, but eat first. You can't starve. Have Professor Dumbledore and the others come to see you? Dylan asked. Not yet, Harry said. I'm sure they'll hurry over when they hear you're awake, Dylan said. Harry's expression flickered at that, a little hesitant. Dylan cocked his head. Is something wrong? Harry licked his lips. You know who was a spirit, but he made me faint for so long. You were alone with him, weren't you? You weren't hurt or affected, were you? Dylan narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Of course not. Professor Dumbledore arrived quickly. Voldemort didn't get a chance to do anything to me. Oh, that's good. Relief washed over Harry's face. Dylan wondered how Harry knew he'd been alone with Voldemort at all. Dumbledore must have told him. He kept the thought to himself. Harry hesitated and then asked, When you were with Voldemort, did he mention my parents to you? Dylan. Alone with us? Sounds like a date. No, I mean, the two of you. There were three of us. Quirrell was there too. Right, the three of you. Did he say anything about them? Why would he? Voldemort wouldn't bring up your parents randomly. Dylan shrugged. Harry wasn't too disappointed. His question had been half hope anyway. I just want to know why he was so cruel to them. Dylan blinked twice. He did know, but he couldn't possibly tell. He shrugged. Who knows? Maybe the next time you meet him, you can ask. Ask him directly. Harry looked up. Yes, Dylan nodded. I saw in a prophecy that you and Voldemort will meet again. Divination? Harry started to ask more, but the hospital wing door opened and Dumbledore peered in instead of Madame Pomfrey. After tending Harry and juggling other responsibilities, Madame Pomfrey needed rest. Dumbledore poked his tall head through the crack. Children, he said, Potter still needs rest. You've been talking for a while. It's time to go. Everyone looked at him. Dylan looked back just in time for Dumbledore to catch his eye. Mr. Hawkwood, the headmaster added, I've always felt you still owe me one thank you, perhaps two? Dylan's memory jumped to the letter Hagrid had handed him with the Umber Shadow breeding permit, an implied request to thank Dumbledore. He'd been too intimidated to do it then, and had let it slide. Dumbledore had an uncanny memory. Dylan forced a smile. Professor Dumbledore, you're right. I owe you two thanks, one for the permit and one for saving me. Ha! Since that's the case, Dumbledore began. Dylan hurried on. Thank you very much for helping me get the Umber Shadow permit. I really like the creature, but some wizards unfairly call them evil. That's nonsense. Many raise them. They're just a little shadowy, Dumbledore said, surprised. And thank you for saving me from Voldemort this time. I'm practically thanking you to death. Dumbledore's beard twitched. There's no need to put it that way. How can there not be? If it weren't for you, I might have been the one. But no one died, Dumbledore said gently. Yes, exactly. Because you appeared, everyone was spared. Otherwise. Dylan's face grew grave for a moment. I truly thank you. Dumbledore opened his mouth, then pursed his lips. From his expression, Dylan guessed Dumbledore had no patience for such theatrics, and perhaps Severus had unwittingly trained him in resistance to exaggerated thanks. Dumbledore smiled. Since you're so grateful, come to my office and talk with this old man. You wouldn't refuse, would you? Dylan kept smiling. Of course I'd be willing. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled with amusement. Then come with me. He told Hermione and Ron to give Harry time to rest and led Dylan out. They climbed the familiar stone staircases, passing the portraits that lined the corridors. When they reached the headmaster's office on the 8th floor, the door opened, releasing that musty, mysterious air Dylan expected. It was his first time inside, and he couldn't help but look around. The wall of portraits fixed their painted eyes on him. Dylan felt 100 invisible gazes. He thought about the enormous experience and legacy pressed into these walls. Dumbledore's reach, his knowledge. Even with the help of whatever system Dylan had access to, Dumbledore's evolution was breathtaking. Without that edge, Dylan thought, no one could catch up. He glanced around, half in awe, half humbled by the historical weight of it all. On the headmaster's desk sat a phoenix, too resplendent to ignore. Dylan wanted absurdly to pluck a feather, but only dared to admire from afar. He could probably face a dragon one day. He had a dragon of his own in the making. But how do you fight a creature with infinite resurrection? Dumbledore led him to the desk and to the Pensieve basin set into the furniture. Dylan felt the pull of occlumency and steadied himself. Dumbledore took his seat and, as if by magic, produced a box of sherbet lemons from his side and offered them. Make yourself at home, child. Don't be stiff, Dumbledore said, popping a candy into his own mouth. I heard you take an interest in divination, that you did readings for Potter and the others, and that they came true. Dylan was surprised Dumbledore knew about his divinations, but at least the headmaster wasn't bringing up anything else he'd rather avoid. He'd always been interested in divination, and he let his curiosity show. Yes, I find divination fascinating. It lets you see possible outcomes, and then you can act to change them or hold them steady, which yields new divinations. Divination touches fate, which has long interested me, Dumbledore said, smiling and tapping the desk with his fingers. He rose and went to the window, looking out at the clear sky above Hogwarts. But I have wondered, Does divination truly exist? Child, what do you think? Dylan kept his gaze low, avoiding the portraits and the phoenix. In some ways, divination is grand, but in others, it's quite small. Oh, how so? Professor Dumbledore, what season is it now? Summer solstice, I suppose. Then do you think it will snow at Hogwarts tomorrow? From the laws of nature, highly unlikely. Dumbledore stood by the window, his silhouette bathed in warm sunlight. Through the clear glass behind his half-moon spectacles, he watched the distant blue sky. The sunlight poured in unreservedly, and the air was growing warmer. After tomorrow's end-of-term feast, the students would be off on their summer holidays. Snow at this time of year was almost inconceivable. Dylan's mouth twitched into a small smile. That's right, the temperature is going to be higher tomorrow. How could it possibly snow? He stared at Dumbledore's back, his gaze unfocused. But shouldn't this also count as foreseeing the future? That's a very interesting way to put it, Dumbledore said, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Dumbledore had heard a lot about Dylan, not from him directly, for Dylan had never sought him out, but through other channels. The boy's frequent squabbles with Severus, his conversations with Minerva, and the time Hagrid had come asking for help so Dylan could keep Umber Shadow. Dumbledore had been curious ever since. He had even sent Hagrid with an invitation, hoping Dylan would call in when he could. Instead, Dylan got permission to keep Umber Shadow and promptly forgot the headmaster who had helped him. Dumbledore found that oddly intriguing. No student had ever ignored him so completely after receiving his help. More of Dylan's deeds had reached him. The troll problem solved single-handedly, his relentless studying that had dragged nearly every professor into tutoring him, and the fact that even Severus set aside large blocks of time each week to teach the boy. All of it deepened Dumbledore's curiosity. Hogwarts had once produced a Dark Lord through oversight. Dumbledore was not about to let another gifted student follow that path. He had used the Mirror of Erised and even the Philosopher's Stone to probe Dylan's heart and future, and on both occasions, the results reassured him. Still, he wanted a face-to-face conversation. Words, he believed, were a powerful influence. "Go on," Dumbledore said, kindly looking back at Dylan. Dylan didn't hold back. "I think it's easy to understand what it means to foresee the future. Just as we can infer from a bright morning that it probably won't rain, or from dark, heavy clouds that it might. These are objective laws of development. By gathering information and mastering those laws, we can predict what's likely to happen." So in a sense, divination is using talent and magic to uncover information that's usually hard to detect, then predicting possible future trends. Exactly, Dylan spoke plainly. Even muggles who have no magic at all can predict many things, weather forecasting, for instance. They're ignorant of magic, but everyone has their own way of understanding the future. Dumbledore chuckled. For example, is death something everyone can foresee? Dylan pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Of course. I must say, Dylan, your ideas are unusual. Dumbledore moved away from the window, fondly running a finger over an old, worn book on a nearby shelf. I've never really believed in divination as fate. I don't put much stock in tea leaves or crystal balls. To me, divination has always been a method of inferring the future from known information. Your explanation aligns perfectly with that. He paused, withdrawing his hand from the book. However, I know divination truly exists. That was something he had to admit. Divination had shaped his life and destiny. It had influenced him in profound ways. Is it because of your friend? Dylan asked. Dumbledore's gaze went distant, and a hint of reminiscence crossed his face. Yes, a former friend. Dylan's mouth twitched. He wanted to see what he could pry out about Grindelwald. Did he predict anything? Dumbledore sat down again. Yes, he foresaw a great trouble, a danger involving both the Muggle world and the magical world. He devoted his life to resolving that trouble so that wizards would not be destroyed by it. Even Dumbledore, drawn in by that young man's ambition at the time, had fought alongside him. That sounds like a difficult, dangerous prophecy to bear. He was a natural seer, Dumbledore said quietly. Sometimes I wish he hadn't been. He didn't go further. Instead, he changed the subject. Dylan, do you think divination is always correct? Always is too absolute, Dylan said. The results depend on the seer's talent. The more talented the seer, the more accurate the predictions. Different seers receive information in different ways. Some see images, some hear sounds, some sense things and infer a future from them. Dumbledore's eyes brightened. What about you? Professor Trelawney mentioned you have a strong divination talent. Dylan thought of how unlikely that was. Trelawney making such a claim must have been prompted by Dumbledore himself. He smiled. My visions are direct. I see fragments of the future, images. I can try changing thoughts and actions, and the images change too. So the future isn't fixed for me. Dumbledore nodded. His long white beard made him seem less imposing. People instinctively let their guard down around him. Dylan, however, kept his eyes lowered and answered honestly. Some futures are unchangeable, Dumbledore said. Some prophecies are definite. No matter what you do, your actions push events toward that outcome. Dylan replied, the talent of some seers may produce definite prophecies. If someone is fated, your actions, whether you try to stop it or not, end up propelling the prophecy forward. Dumbledore's expression tightened. The most fitting example was Tom Riddle. After the prophecy, his choices had led him down the dark path that split his soul. But what if he hadn't believed the prophecy? Prophecies, Dumbledore reminded himself, are only supplements to the present. If you don't trust a prophecy, your present needn't be affected by it. Dylan added, I only choose to trust the prophecies I derive myself. I can't know whether what others say is true. He smiled. Someone might pop up claiming to be a great seer just to trick me. Dumbledore laughed. Although you're still very young, your thoughts are more mature than many adults. Maybe it's from how much you read. Emboldened, Dylan asked, May I ask you some questions, Principal? Of course, Dumbledore said. I've been asking all the questions so far. It's only fair you ask me some. Dylan took a breath. I'm very interested in the Patronus charm and the Fidelius charm. Professor Snape recently taught me legilimency, and the Fidelius charm intrigues me, especially how it works against probes. Dumbledore smiled faintly. You've made good progress in legilimency and occlumency. You're qualified to learn both spells. I'd be happy to teach them. First, the Fidelius charm, Dumbledore said. If you want to learn it, you must understand who can truly be the object of your utmost loyalty. The Fidelius is a profound defensive spell that hides a secret in the heart of a secret keeper chosen by you. Once the spell is cast, unless the secret keeper voluntarily reveals the secret, no one can access it. No magic, no probing will find it. His voice rang steady, like a tolling bell. Imagine you have a secret you don't want anyone to know. The Fidelius locks it in an invisible safe. The secret keeper holds the key. During the war, the Order cast the Fidelius on people's homes to protect them. Voldemort and his followers, even when very near, couldn't find those houses. Dylan blinked. He hadn't expected Dumbledore to bring up those events with him, a first year. They weren't exactly secret anymore. Those who should have died had, and those who should have fled had fled. Still, Dumbledore's mention of it surprised him. So if the secret keeper betrays the secret, Dylan began. Dumbledore's face darkened with regret. Then the protection collapses instantly. The secret is exposed without reservation. Choosing a secret keeper requires extreme caution. It is a pledge of trust and the foundation of the charm. Dylan leaned forward, scratching his head. Does the secret keeper have to be a person? Dumbledore's mouth curved in a benevolent smile. Generally, wizards don't use the Fidelius on objects or creatures. Humans have complex minds and strong wills. A secret keeper must be able to understand and uphold the secret. Only then can a stable magical bond form with the caster. Dylan thought of Hagrid and almost grinned. That was someone who absolutely shouldn't be a secret keeper. So if the secret keeper doesn't understand or doesn't take it seriously, they might inadvertently reveal the secret? Dumbledore nodded. Exactly. And if you choose a magical creature, even if it understands the secret, its mind may be more easily invaded. Then the secret could be exposed all at once. Of course, in theory, a sufficiently intelligent magical creature that can communicate and keep a secret could act as a secret keeper, but that's rare. I understand, Dylan said. And the Patronus charm? Dumbledore's voice rippled like a clear stream. The Patronus charm is a most special, highly defensive magic, a powerful ward against darkness. It summons a guardian spirit, formed from your happiest memories and your strongest will. This guardian defends you from Dementors and other dark forces. He flicked his wand, and a silver phoenix emerged, circling gracefully through the room. Dylan abandoned his usual feigned disinterest and stared. Dementors feed on happiness and hope, Dumbledore continued. They leave only despair behind. A Patronus is like a light that dispels that darkness. The incantation itself isn't the hard part. The key is concentrating your happiest memories, warm moments with family, sincere friendships, the sense of achievement after a difficult task. When you say the words, you must pour your attention and emotion into them. Your magic will resonate with those memories and summon your Patronus. Each Patronus is unique. Its form reflects your personality, your inner qualities, and your deepest desires. Dylan nodded. He had some understanding of both charms, but hadn't explored them deeply. Dumbledore's explanations helped a great deal. Don't rush into trying it, Dumbledore said, smiling. You can go back and practice thoroughly. Okay, Professor, Dylan said. Chapter 105, Renaming Arno, the House Cup. Dumbledore, it's your turn. Grrr. Dylan Hawkwood's stomach growled, and Dumbledore stopped explaining the spell at precisely the right moment. Dylan smiled apologetically. Sorry, Professor. That's all right. It's about time for dinner anyway. Dumbledore waved his hand, and the silver phoenix Patronus dissipated. He had been maintaining the Patronus charm throughout the lesson. No wonder Minerva likes you so much. You truly are a talented and perceptive young wizard. You flatter me, Dylan said. Shall you go then? Dumbledore asked. Dylan stood. I'll go eat first. No problem. Dumbledore nodded but didn't get up to see him out. As Dylan reached for the door, the headmaster called after him. Dylan Hawkwood, remember one thing. Dylan stopped and turned. Yes? Dumbledore considered for a moment. Truly powerful magic springs from inner belief and courage. If you ever have to face darkness, do not be afraid. Awaken the light within you, and your Patronus will always be by your side to protect you. Dylan pursed his lips and nodded seriously. He looked up and met Dumbledore's gaze. I will, Headmaster Dumbledore. Dumbledore chuckled. Minerva told me you once prophesied she would one day become headmistress. Is that true? Dylan was taken aback, then nodded. Yes. You really saw that? Yes. Dumbledore fell silent for a moment, then smiled. I understand. Go eat. Don't starve yourself. Goodbye, Professor. Dylan opened the door and left. Once the office door was closed, he glanced down at the two small notebooks in his hands. He had gone in only to ask a question or two, maybe pick up some useful knowledge, but Dumbledore had taught him 2 spells without reservation. Dylan sighed inwardly and headed for the Great Hall. It was noon. Dumbledore wasn't joining him for dinner, which suited Dylan just fine. No awkward walk that might turn into more questions to answer on the way. While he walked, he thought back to the phoenix in Dumbledore's office and wondered if Dumbledore might be an animagus. Most animagi have animal forms that relate to them, and sometimes a person's Patronus and animagus form echo each other. But animagi can't usually be truly magical creatures, so Dylan wasn't sure. He'd ask Professor McGonagall later. After lunch, Dylan spent the afternoon in the library, finishing the books he'd been working through. Late that night, once everyone in the dormitory was asleep, he put on the shadow ring to conceal himself and, using Colball's phasing ability, slipped through the castle walls and vanished into the Forbidden Forest. He wasn't certain whether he would go home for the summer. It wasn't urgent. Even if he went, he might not see anyone, or he might see only 3 people. He wondered whether his parents had started their alt accounts yet. He made a face. They needed to make money quickly. He'd plan everything for them. Hagrid had been worried Dylan might leave right after term ended, and he was also concerned that fewer people at Hogwarts over the summer would mean any commotion in the forest would draw attention. So 2 days ago, Hagrid had asked Ron to slip a message to Dylan, arranging a meeting in the Forbidden Forest that night. They hadn't written because letters could be intercepted. Coincidentally, the fresh meat Dylan had bought for Arno had arrived. He'd been contributing money so the young dragon could get proper nutritious food that Hagrid couldn't always afford. The forest was a maze of gnarled trunks and interlocking branches. Moonlight slipped through in thin veins. Dylan found the vine-covered hollow Hagrid used and pushed aside the greenery. A dim yellow lantern light glowed inside. Hagrid himself waved at him, tall and broad in the little cave. "Evening, Dylan," Hagrid called. "Been waiting for you. I've got loads of grub for Arno tonight. Dylan eyed the lamp. Aren't you worried about being seen? If someone found this... Hagrid scratched his head and laughed. I just lit it so you could see. Didn't want it to be pitch black. I haven't been here long. Dylan hid a smile and flicked his wand. Swish! A young dragon appeared, accompanied by a black lynx-like creature that resembled a sleek cat. The cave warmed instantly with life. Hiss! The dragon chittered. You shouldn't copy your Coalball brother's cry, Dylan scolded. Arno tucked its neck in a little at the rebuke, but peered around with round, dark eyes. Coalball hissed in indignation, then contentedly called, Moo Moo! Arno cocked its head. Hiss, hiss. Moo? Dylan couldn't help but grin. No matter how it sounds, it's adorable. Hagrid beamed and stepped forward to stroke the dragon's head. Good boy. Every time I see him, he's gotten bigger. Dylan produced several cans of high-protein, nutrient-rich meat and poured them into Arno's large iron basin. Hagrid added chunks he'd bought as well. The dragon's eyes lit up. Coalball stared intently at the feast. You eat that, Dylan told the dragon. He filled a smaller basin for Coalball. Moo moo, Coalball called, and they began to eat. Arno tore into the meat with big, greedy bites, meat juices dripping at the corners of its mouth. Coalball nibbled more daintily, shaving tiny pieces and licking the moist meat with a pink tongue. While they fed, Hagrid circled Arno and inspected him closely. Seeing how lively the dragon was, he relaxed and turned serious. Nothing wrong at school, is there? Dylan blinked. No, everything's normal. Arno's been in my pet area, right? No one's found out I'm looking after him? Hagrid nodded, face solemn. You can't let anyone know. If it gets out, we'll be in a right mess. Dylan met his gaze. As long as you keep it secret, I'm fine. He'd been thinking about the Fidelius charm Dumbledore had shown him. Once he'd mastered it, he might make Hagrid his secret keeper, burying the dragon's hiding place inside Hagrid's heart. Dylan worried Hagrid might be coaxed into spilling the secret, and Hagrid, puffing out his chest, laughed. Don't worry, I won't tell. Dylan's eyelids twitched. He didn't entirely trust such earnest promises. What was that you muttered? Hagrid asked, peering at Coalball. Nothing, Dylan said and walked over to the black creature. She's gotten so big, she looks like a girl. Hagrid studied the animal with its rear up in the air as it ate. After a moment, he nodded. Seems like it. Then Beta isn't really an official name. How about we call her Norberta? Beta can be a nickname. Hagrid brightened. A proper name. Norberta suits her. He produced a rock cake and offered it to the creature. Dylan looked at it. Hagrid's homemade rock cake was hardly gourmet, but the creature dipped it and chomped, clearly enjoying it. Dylan couldn't help but think, teaching a creature properly requires you to be the one doing it. Dylan didn't ask for Beta's scales or dragon blood tonight. He'd not been brewing many potions lately and had been concentrating on spells and study. After the two finished their meal, Dylan put the animals back into their pet space. Hagrid promised to provide more delicacies, swearing he'd spend most of his pay on them. Dylan rolled his eyes inwardly. He wasn't about to let Hagrid bankrupt himself for the dragon. But he left on good terms, slipping out of the forest and back to the castle. Harry was still in the hospital wing, Ron keeping him company. Dylan got a few hours' sleep, then spent the next day in the library, studying the Fidelius charm in depth. When the end-of-year feast arrived, he took his seat in the Great Hall. The hall was draped in silver and green. Slytherin had won the House Cup for 7 consecutive years, and a huge Slytherin serpent banner hung over the staff table. Hermione was already seated. Most students had arrived late. Harry came in last, looking pale but conscious. Madame Pomfrey had finally released him. The room fell quiet at his entrance, then swelled into whispering. People were talking about Harry's collapse and about the points deductions Gryffindor had taken. Professor Snape had held back on point deductions in class despite his animosity, but the trio's repeated incursions into restricted areas and the most recent incident meant a deduction of 100 points. Dylan protested inwardly. This had been his first time entering that forbidden place, but Ron's slip had implicated them all. Dumbledore stood. Another school year has ended, he said, smiling. It's time to announce the House Cup. The expected result was not what it had been at one point. Gryffindor had earlier led thanks to points Dylan and Harry had accumulated, but the Quidditch Cup went elsewhere after Harry's fall. Malfoy's curfew breach and the rumors he'd spread about Harry raising a dragon had cost Slytherin points, so the standings had shifted. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff applauded. Slytherin and Gryffindor sat in tense silence. Dumbledore's tone then changed. "I must acknowledge those whose actions deserve credit." He looked over the hall. Miss Hermione Granger, when flames threatened, she deduced the correct course of action under extreme pressure. 50 points to Gryffindor. The Gryffindors erupted. Hermione hid her blush. She'd reached the answer only partly. Someone else had actually solved the key. But Dumbledore credited her nonetheless. Dumbledore continued. "Mr. Ron Weasley showed chess skills of a remarkable level. 50 points. More applause. Ron ducked his head, mortified by the praise for a game that had been more luck than strategy. Then Dumbledore surveyed the hall again. "Third, Messrs. Dylan Hawkwood and Harry Potter," he announced. "For their courage, daring, and wisdom, 120 points to Gryffindor." The Great Hall exploded. 120 points? Students shouted. Gryffindor clapped itself hoarse, calculations and cheers bouncing about. Dylan watched Dumbledore with a small, private smile. The Headmaster's Awards not only effectively canceled the 100-point deduction, but added even more, vaulting Gryffindor past Ravenclaw to claim first place. Slytherin had fallen to fourth, an almost unheard-of result. At the Slytherin table, faces were stone still, eyes flat, even Professor Snape's expression unreadable. Chapter 106. Going Home for the Summer Vacation. Magic? It doesn't exist. Dylan had been waiting for Dumbledore to award Neville 10 points, but it turned out Neville had already been credited with an extra 60, and Gryffindor's total swept the House Cup away from the other three houses. Dumbledore didn't even have to call Neville's name. He simply raised his hands and announced, "The scores have changed. Gryffindor has won the House Cup." The Great Hall erupted. Dumbledore clapped once, and the silver-green light that filled the hall faded, replaced almost instantly by rich gold and crimson. The green banners hanging overhead flipped to vibrant scarlet. The huge coiled serpent banner behind the teacher's table uncoiled and became a roaring lion. Gryffindor faces flushed with excitement. Cheers surged again and again, as if the vaulted ceiling might give way. Students jumped to their feet, waving arms and throwing hats into the air. They swarmed Dylan and Harry, celebrating with abandon. Hufflepuff joined in quickly, cheering for the Lions. Ravenclaw paused, but at the sight of Professor Flitwick clapping, they joined more politely. Only Slytherin looked sour, silent, without a single clap for Gryffindor. Neville finally exhaled. He looked at Dylan and said, "I'm glad you helped me this year. I really thought I might fail without you." Dylan smiled. "How could you? With how you worked, just passing would have been a success." He glanced at Neville's report. Not every subject was outstanding, but everything was passing. Herbology had earned him an outstanding. The others were exceeds expectations or acceptable. Wahaha! Ron clutched his report to his chest. Dylan and Neville watched him gloat. "All passing, straight through, easy," he crowed. Hermione rolled her eyes. "Even Neville has an O and you have all As. What's there to be so pleased about?" Ron bristled. "Hey, I have an E too," Hermione snorted. Ron pointed at Harry. "What about you, Harry? How is it?" Harry looked relieved as he tucked his report back into his robes. "Not bad." He smiled faintly. All passing, no failing grades. Hogwarts wouldn't send him back to his aunt's, and that thought made him happy. He liked his classmates and most of his professors. He wanted to stay here and grow up with them. Well, except for the Slytherins and Voldemort. And Filch. If Filch didn't chase him at night, he might even be willing to be acquaintances. "Hermione, what about you and Dylan?" Harry asked later in the Gryffindor common room, sitting across from them. Hermione opened her notice and blinked. "Oh, first place." She smiled with surprise. Ron sneered. "That's only because you got full marks and Dylan did too. And your initial comes before Hawkwood's, which is why Dylan lost out," Hermione added smugly. Dylan laughed. "There's no reason to be unhappy. Congratulations." Hermione's face softened. "Even though we both got full marks, you really should have been first." She glared at Ron again. "Why are you congratulating me if my rank is above yours?" Dylan shrugged and folded his report into his system panel's inventory, then took out another notice and signed his name. "Grades are a measure of progress. not a definition of who we are. If you think I deserved first, then that shows my effort is noticed. No need to dwell on a card. Hermione studied him for a moment, then smiled and signed her notice. You could really write a book. You say things that make sense. Dylan raised an eyebrow and laughed. I'll think about it. Ron gaped. Dylan, you're seriously going to write a book? My Merlin, who would buy a book by an 11-year-old? I'm 11, all right, Dylan shot back. Dylan has that kind of ability, Hermione said sharply. Ron muttered and slunk back toward Harry. Harry placed the notice in front of him. All right, Ron, sign this. Professor said we all must. Ron took the pen and grumbled as he signed. I don't see why we can't use magic at home. It's our holiday. After signing, the friends chatted a while longer. Percy arrived to organize departures. Everyone, follow me. Hagrid's waiting. They left the common room and met Hagrid at the station. Dylan caught Hagrid's eye for a second before looking away. He had written home, and his mother had asked him to come back for summer. Hagrid looked heartbroken at the thought of not seeing Beta over the holidays. Dylan promised to have toys and food mailed to Hagrid's hut while he was away, and that cheered the gamekeeper. Hagrid squeezed Dylan's hand, grateful. On the Hogwarts Express, Dylan changed out of his robes and into the modified coat he'd been wearing. The carriage rocked, the countryside slid past, ancient forests, deep valleys, then suburban towns and villages. He read until the train slowed and finally stopped. He closed his book with a yawn and peered out. Home. At the station, his parents were waiting. Baby! Maeve ran forward, and Dylan couldn't help smiling. She pushed aside Hare to look him over with both delight and worry. You're back. I thought you didn't want your mother anymore. Dylan grimaced at the memory of being kept from coming home for Christmas, but he didn't answer. Maeve felt his shoulders, turned him this way and that, and pinched his cheek. Where did your baby fat go? You've lost weight. Are they not feeding you? No, Mom, Dylan said. I've just grown. I still eat well. Hubert, smiling, ruffled his son's hair. Spray, you look taller. In a few years, you'll be taller than me. I'll use magic to grow if I have to, Dylan joked. Hubert laughed. I'll buy you plenty of nutritious food. You'll grow fine without that. Maeve reached for Dylan's luggage and blinked when she found only a small backpack. You didn't bring any luggage? It's in my pocket, Dylan said. They peered at his ordinary coat pocket, stunned. He had told them in letters about the space-expanded pocket, but they hadn't seen it before. Dylan smiled inwardly. He had a system inventory that handled all his storage needs. No need for a spatial charm. They walked to the parking area in warm summer sun, the London air carrying its familiar smells. At the curb sat a gleaming Bentley. Dylan raised an eyebrow. His parents had never mentioned buying a car in their letters. Hubert grinned. Surprised? Dylan gave a dry look. A little. After I listened to you about Bentley being a good long-term bet, I invested, Hubert said with obvious pride. I'm a very small shareholder now, but the company provided us a car. We didn't spend a penny. Dylan hadn't told his father to invest. He'd offered some general advice, but he hadn't expected Hubert to act. He narrowed his eyes playfully. He planned to check his father's accounts this summer. Hubert opened the doors, and they climbed in. Dylan took the back seat. Maeve sat beside him in the passenger seat. Hubert slid behind the wheel, looking 10 years younger. Watching their bright faces, Dylan couldn't help thinking that money had made them happier. He shrugged inside. They were his parents. If a little wealth made them more cheerful, that was fine. The drive began. Dylan settled back and listened to the hum of the engine, thinking of the mail he'd have Hagrid deliver to Beta and the long summer ahead. Chapter 107, Nocturne Alley should be my home turf. Cruciatus! Dylan's father drove him straight to a villa complex. They had bought a new house here. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't the countryside either, still convenient to drive anywhere. According to his father, housing prices were high. It was a reasonably wealthy neighborhood. Finally, no more living in the basement, Dylan said. The basement he'd lived in before had only a tiny window that opened at ground level into the first floor, like a storage room. Dylan spent the day with his parents. It wasn't until evening, after a meal his mother had cooked, that he told them, I've got some things to do tomorrow. I probably won't be home tomorrow night, so don't wait up. Eat early and go to bed. Maeve was about to go clear the dishes when she turned at his words. Since Dylan had come home, they had sent the nanny away for the time being. There were too many awkward things to explain in front of outsiders when your son was studying at a magic academy. So Maeve took on the housework herself. Dylan had thought about casting a spell to help clean, but he wasn't sure using magic here would invite the ministry's attention. Better not to cause trouble. If he used magic, he planned to do it away from home. Going out? Be careful then. Don't let anyone trick you. Maeve warned. Don't worry, Mum. Your son won't be fooled, Dylan replied with a smile. Hubert didn't say much, but his eyes were worried. His son was only 11. Although Dylan looked older and more mature than the last time he'd seen him, as a father, he still fretted. There was nothing he could do about magical matters. He couldn't hire bodyguards or otherwise intervene. He could only keep his worries to himself and work harder to provide for the family. After Dylan went to his room, Hubert wandered into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around Maeve's waist from behind. "Oh, what are you doing? Dylan's still here," Maeve admonished, turning a playful glare on him. Hubert chuckled. "Our son won't be home tomorrow. We finally have some free time. How about a movie? Then a candlelit dinner tonight. Dylan won't be back, so we could—" "Shh!" Maeve batted him and smiled. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Hubert grinned. With her agreeing like that, he was certain. Dylan didn't pay much attention to his parents flirting. It was rare for an old couple still to be so affectionate. It made him strangely comforted. After breakfast the next morning, he found a note on the dining table and his mother had left his breakfast in the microwave. He prepared to go out. Today's plan, Nocturne Alley. He needed to buy food for Beta and Coleball and pick up some special materials. Before leaving, he wrote a short letter to Hagrid, mainly greetings and an update on his current address. Then he headed for the Leaky Cauldron. On the way, he crumpled his wizarding robe into a black cloak so it could cover most of his face. Passing through the bar into the little courtyard behind, he changed clothes, put on a voice-changing mask, and checked to make sure no one was following him. The Leaky Cauldron passage led from the Muggle world into Diagon Alley. Wizards who truly lived in the Muggle world rarely used it, and Dylan didn't want to attract Muggle attention. Inside the bar, he had to be careful of other wizards' gazes, too. He tapped a pattern of bricks with his wand. The wall opened into an archway. Dylan stepped through, but didn't enter Diagon Alley. He turned toward Nocturne Alley, just a few steps away. If Diagon Alley was wide and bright, Nocturne Alley looked like a decaying slum. Narrow lanes wound between crooked buildings that seemed ready to tumble. Towering houses blocked out light. The air smelled of rot and damp. Dylan frowned at the gloom, but felt a flutter of excitement. This was where the dark arts belonged. He walked down the slick, moss-covered flagstones. Shop windows displayed bizarre wares, creature organs preserved in glass, murky liquids, and twisted cursed trinkets radiating unpleasant auras. Ragged, thin wizards crouched in doorways, some hunched, some limping. When a passerby walked by, they cast hungry, calculating looks as if thinking of how to prey on the stranger. Instead of fear, Dylan felt exhilarated. This is where my dark arts should shine, he thought, grinning inwardly. He couldn't use his real name here. He tried out aliases in his head, Thanos, Muzan, Uchiha Gandalf, then laughed at the absurdity. Tarot cards crossed his mind. In the end, he settled on a simple code name, Fool. He was only 11, but he already stood about 1.56 meters tall. With height insoles, he'd look 70 inches. Clad in the black cloak and mask, no one could see his features. He walked with a casual arrogance that made the nearby denizens glare with a mix of resentment and greed. As he passed, a dark figure lunged at him from behind like a gust of rotten wind. "You think you're Gandalf?" the man sneered. Dylan turned, raised his wand, and let his voice, deepened by the mask, roll out. Crucio. A bright green beam struck the attacker full on. The man screamed, hurled backward, and collapsed to the cobbles, curling into himself and clawing at the ground as his body convulsed. His wails cut off into ragged moans. The alley went silent. Faces around them froze. "How dare he? Doesn't he fear aurors?" a sharp-faced witch murmured, but someone clapped a hand over her mouth. An old man on a cane trembled so badly his stick almost fell. Crucio, this. Even here, the use of an unforgivable curse out in the open was unthinkable. The denizens of Nocturne Alley might dabble in dark arts, but none of them would casually utter an unforgivable curse. Only someone like the Dark Lord, or his closest followers, would have that kind of recklessness. To do it in daylight was a different kind of madness. Dylan looked at the attacker writhing on the ground. The man's struggles were already weakening. Dylan's expression was calm. This is what Crucio looks like, he mused. He had cast dozens of Crucios at Quirrell before and couldn't even kill him. Voldemort could endure the pain in a way others couldn't. Still, Crucio did its work on lesser wizards. Several other would-be attackers in tattered coats tightened around themselves and backed away. Behind the shop counters, owners cursed silently while hastily hiding their filthier items. No one dared speak aloud against him. Dylan headed toward Borgin and Burke's. He'd wanted to buy some curiosities, maybe even corpses, but now it seemed late to look for raw bodies on the street. If the man outside died, he deserved it. If he survived, he would get a taste of Dylan's magic. The door on Borgin and Burke's creaked as he entered. A musty smell hit him. Mr. Borgin was busy arranging a shelf of twisted skulls. When he saw the imposing figure enter, his face split into a too-wide smile. He practically bowed, voice oily and deferential, trying not to look directly at Dylan. "I have a batch of acromantula corpses, venom included. How many can you take?" Dylan said. Dylan had unlocked the properties of Avada Kedavra to a frightening extent. Killing acromantulas was easy. One decisive Avada, and any spider that crossed him would be blasted. When he visited Hagrid with Beta, he sometimes walked through the acromantula nests and killed dozens to collect useful parts. The spiders seldom fought him by the end. More often they fled. He never wiped them out, just enough to take what he needed. Mr. Borgin had assumed the ominous customer had come to buy. He hesitated when Dylan said he had corpses and venom to sell, but quickly recovered. Acromantula bodies aren't incredibly useful, but their venom sells well. If you have plenty of venom, I'll take all the corpses with it, he offered, trying to sound nonchalant. Dylan produced a wand and a large jar appeared on the counter. Mr. Borgin's jaw dropped. A jar that size of acromantula venom would mean hundreds of pints. "My old venom, how did you get so much?" Mr. Borgin blurted before he could stop himself. Realization made his face go pale and sweat bead on his brow. I'm sorry, honored guest, I didn't mean to pry." Dylan shrugged. "Found the acromantulas, used Imperio to make them spit all their venom. Then I killed them and collected their bodies in venom. That's it." Mr. Borgin froze. His fear visibly deepened. Imperio, to force creatures to give up their venom, sounded monstrous. Could the same be done to people? Could he be forced to hand over all his savings? The thought drenched him in cold sweat. Dylan grew impatient and frowned. "Do you find the amount too much?" he asked simply. No, of course not," Mr. Borgin stammered, shaking his head like a rattle. He forced an ugly, nervous smile, shuffled behind the counter, and fumbled with a secret compartment. He produced 4 small money bags and pushed them toward Dylan. "These are 40,000 galleons. It's everything I have now. I'll pay you for the venom," he gulped, face a mixture of flattery and terror. Dylan raised an eyebrow at the pile. 40,000 galleons? 1 pint of acromantula venom usually sold for around 100 galleons. Even in the black market, 100 pints wouldn't be worth 40,000. Mr. Borgin had either gone mad or was desperately flattering him. Dylan calmly placed the 4 bags on the counter. They were enchanted with undetectable extension charms. "Give me another bag," Dylan said. Sir, I truly don't have any more." Mr. Borgin's voice trembled. Chapter 108, Chant my true name, and you will receive blessings. Esteemed guest, your acromantula venom is of exceptionally high quality, not the kind ripped out after killing an acromantula, which would be inactive, Mr. Borgin said with a mournful expression. "It's just that I really don't have any more. I can't get even a bit out." Dylan could feel Borgin's panic through legitimacy and the subtle tug of Imperio. He knew Borgin had misunderstood him. Dylan chuckled softly. "If you won't give me a bag, do you expect me to hand over my spatial pocket? There are a lot of acromantula corpses." Borgin startled, then gathered himself. The wrinkles on his face eased a little. All right. A spatial pocket? Of course I have one." He rummaged under the counter and produced a large leather bag and 3 rough shoulder satchels. These are the biggest I've got. You can put as much as you like. Dylan's black robe brushed over them. When he withdrew his hand, the bags bulged as if magically filled. Perfect, he said, satisfied. He no longer had to cram corpses into the system panel, and he'd gotten more than 4 times the venom's market value in galleons. He was very pleased. He pocketed Mr. Borgen's money pouch without ceremony. Borgen hesitated, forcing a smile and staying silent. You did well. Next time I have business, I'll come find you again, Dylan said quietly. What? Borgen's mind screamed. There's a next time? Catch this fiend, Aurors. Lock him in Azkaban. He's not satisfied with robbing me of 40,000 galleons. Even if the venom was rare and valuable, he still made off with my money. Yet this monster promises to come back? Borgen cursed inwardly but kept his face smooth. He dared not show disrespect. He feared Dylan's legitimacy. Even without Imperio, one deep probe could read his thoughts. And then, of course, Imperio might follow. You don't seem happy? Dylan prompted. Borgen's smile froze. How could that be? It is my great fortune to do business with an esteemed guest like you. A tremendous honor. He forced the words out and then managed, I'll be here when you return. Whenever you come, I'll be ready. Good. Rest assured, there will be a next time, Dylan nodded. Borgen almost ground his teeth, but only managed another forced grin. That is truly an honor. Dylan left, satisfied. 40,000 galleons, 200,000 pounds, earned in one outing. As he strode to the door, Borgen scurried forward to open it. Please, take your time. Please do visit again. Dylan glanced at him, amused. If he did take his time, Borgen would be miserable anyway. Once outside, Dylan couldn't help but marvel that robbery was indeed the fastest way to make money. No, this wasn't robbery, he muttered to himself. A transaction. Who was robbed? It was consensual. He walked down the dark, narrow length of Nocturne Alley, his black robe and cloak billowing like Professor Snape's. The shuttered shops whispered behind bowed doors. Suddenly, the space ahead rippled like a cracked mirror. Light twisted, the air warped, and a group of Aurors apparated, robes flying. One of them pointed and shouted, It's... Before he finished, Dylan's eyes under the mask lifted. The man's face froze as Dylan's calm gaze met him. Dylan spoke no overt spell and made no wand flourish. Swish, an Imperio took hold, silent and precise, hitting the speaking Auror. The man's eyes went vacant, his body slack. What's wrong with you? The others cried. The controlled Auror slowly raised his wand, but not at Dylan. He aimed at the Auror beside him. Bat bogey hex, he intoned in the empty voice. Hey, what are you doing? Chaos erupted. It's a spell. What did you do to him? Another Auror shouted, turning toward Dylan. This looks like Imperio, someone else said, pale. What? Imperio? They gaped, no wand waggling, no shouted incantation, just a blank stare and obedience. Dylan shook his head at the bat bogey hex the man had cast. Too weak, he murmured. He judged the Aurors quickly. Ordinary. Worse than the magical puppets Professor McGonagall could produce. No wonder Voldemort swept through the ministry when his followers were this undisciplined. He raised his wand with a casual motion and uttered, Imperious Curse. Several dark streams shot from the tip and struck other Aurors. More fell under his control. Because he was operating under a code name, Dylan avoided obvious wand effects. His spells were precise and efficient. I didn't expect these people to be easier to control than Beta when he's still an egg, he thought. The controlled Aurors went dull-faced and obedient, turning their wands on their comrades. The remaining Aurors were forced to retaliate. Spells streaked and ricocheted across Nocturne Alley like artillery, the air filled with bright flashes, screams, and roars. Dylan tucked his wand away and walked through the crossfire, unhurried, heading toward Diagon Alley. Incendio! A searing ball of fire launched toward Dylan's back. He ignored it. Impedimenta! A silver spell flew from the side and struck the fireball, releasing sparks and a shriek of energy. Colloportus! Diffindo! Spells continued to erupt behind him, but Dylan's strides never faltered. Then a low, penetrating voice drifted over the clamor. I am the fool, and I am Karthus. Speak my true name, and I will grant you 1 moment of absolution before you are ended by my hand. Dylan's figure slid into the crowd, and Nocturne Alley fell into a brief silence before the Auror's chaos resumed. The dark wizards who had been too frightened to move when Dylan first cast a Crucio now had reason to take heart. They had expected the Aurors to subdue this audacious wizard, but Dylan's effortless manipulation of the aurors shocked them. Some watched with growing admiration. To be able to control a group of aurors so easily? Praise Voldemort. Is he playing with puppets? One muttered admiringly. A limping young wizard's eyes shone fanatically as he stared where Dylan had gone. He remembered how, before the Dark Lord's fall, he tormented muggles and sneered at the aurors. After the Dark Lord's defeat, he'd been reduced to hiding, humiliated and helpless. But now someone had mocked the aurors and walked away unscathed. Could the Dark Wizard's era be returning? Fool, 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 the limping wizard whispered, clutching a stale bit of bread and murmuring the name over and over. Others who had witnessed the aurors turning on one another also began to murmur the name, reverent and awed, like worshippers calling out a leader's title. Dylan Hawkwood, the fool. Dylan Hawkwood, to those who didn't know his other face, had already changed out of his black robe. He took off his mask and his height-enhancing pads and once more looked like the young wizard just finishing his first year. He slipped into the familiar pet shop in Diagon Alley. A faint tang of licorice and the musky scent of animal fur greeted him, quickly smoothed by the store's air fresheners. He bought several fresh strips of meat and then went to Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Warm air and the smell of dye welcomed him in the robe shop. Under enchanted chandeliers, silk and brocade robes shimmered. Madame Malkin, tidying a shelf, lit up when she saw him, a wide, bright smile blooming on her face. "Oh, Mr. Dylan Hawkwood, you should be on holiday now, shouldn't you?" "Yes, Madame Malkin. I just got off for the holidays," Dylan replied with a smile. "Did the robes I made you last time fit well?" she asked, eager. Madame Malkin's business did well. Hogwarts students, endorsed by the school, often came to her for robes. Dylan had custom-ordered many robes before. He was a valued customer, so her enthusiasm was genuine. "Would you like to add some new robes? We've just received some precious fabrics, protective cloth that resists minor spell attacks, and mood silk that changes color with your feelings. They'd make lovely additions." Dylan cleared his throat. He could have the system tweak any design, but each modification cost 100 galleons, and for ordinary styles, it was cheaper to have Madame Malkin do the work. "I want to custom order 10 more robes. I've grown a bit taller, and though my old robes still fit, I want some looser ones." 10? Madame Malkin's smile widened. "All the same style, or different for home and banquets?" 10 different styles, Dylan decided. "Splendid. Tell me what you want." She produced a notebook and began writing as Dylan gave measurements and preferences. After taking his dimensions, she nodded approvingly. "You've really grown. You'll be a handsome young man." "Am I not handsome now?" Dylan asked, half teasing. Madame Malkin laughed. "Oh, you are, but you'll be even more so." "I'll take that to heart," he said. After placing the order for 20 sets, an obvious mistake in the original, but here he'd ordered 10 more, Dylan left Madame Malkin and headed for the potion ingredients shop. On the way, he passed Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. The colorful sign swayed, and the sweet smell of milk stopped him. "Fortescue's," he muttered. Florian had appeared in the original tales and knew a great deal of medieval history. "I might as well say hello." He pushed open the shop door. A bell chimed. The parlor was cozy, tables and chairs neatly arranged, freezers full of bright ice creams. Behind the counter, Florian Fortescue glanced up. "Oh, young man, good afternoon. Are you alone?" Dylan nodded and asked for a chocolate raspberry sundae. Fortescue, amiable as ever, prepared it quickly and handed it to him. "Many Hogwarts students come here," he said. "What year are you in?" "First year. Well, I'll be in second year when school starts," Dylan answered. "Oh, first year?" Fortescue's interest brightened. "Do you know a first year named Hawkwood?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "That's me, Dylan Hawkwood." Fortescue's round face showed surprise, then amusement. "You are Hawkwood? I'm sorry, I was presumptuous. Over Christmas, many students came by and we talked about you. You eat ice cream in winter, huh?" Fortescue chuckled. Dylan took a bite and nodded. "It's very good." Florian beamed. "I heard your name from the kids. They said your grades and performances at school are outstanding. Every professor praises you. I had wondered when I'd run into you in person." Dylan blinked. "So you thought I might be overrated?" Florian laughed heartily. Chapter 109, Pet Space Suitcase. System, you... "Young man, you're exactly my type." Fukasco laughed, clapping his hands. This one's on me, Dylan blinked. Thank you very much. Could I get another one to go? Fukasco froze for a moment, then laughed heartily again. Of course, no problem. No problem? Aren't you losing money? Making money is secondary. Wizards always bring their kids here. I'm not giving away freebies to the wrong people. He winked at Dylan. Dylan scooped another spoonful of ice cream into his mouth. I didn't expect children of pureblood wizards to like cold drinks. Don't say it like that. Purebloods have the right to like what they like. They aren't emotionless gods, Fukasco answered defensively. Dylan nodded. You're right. That was presumptuous of me. Fukasco changed the subject. Still, some purebloods act pretty arrogant while eating ice cream. For their kids, I put a bit less in the cup, then they have to buy another. Dylan pursed his lips. You're honest to a fault. Fukasco chuckled. It's how I run my business. Say, have you been taught by Professor Snape, privately? When he was little, he especially loved my ice cream, Fukasco added, but he hasn't come back since he grew up. Fukasco mumbled, I should have known not to feed him so many free samples back then. Dylan widened his eyes. Professor Snape liked your ice cream? Of course, Fukasco beamed. He's the potions professor at Hogwarts now. Tsk, young and promising. The cold sweetness of the sundae made Dylan feel blissfully comfortable. The little gossip about Snape put him in an even better mood. When he returned to school, he thought there would be plenty to talk about with Professor Snape. Professor Snape usually teaches me potions, too. I've learned a lot from him. Oh, those other young wizards were right. Sounds like you're one of those kids who get on the professor's good side. Dylan steered the conversation. Most professors don't have anything against me. A few I'm not close with, like the history of magic teacher. Ha! You mean Professor Binns? He's always the same. But if you can get along with him, sometimes you pick up little historical secrets. That sounds interesting, Dylan said. Fukasco smiled. I just know a bit about the witch hunts in the Middle Ages. Middle Ages? Dylan's curiosity pricked. When I was a muggle, I heard legends about wizards being hunted. Were those all true? Half true, half false. Fukasco waved a hand. Want to hear about that period? I'm interested. If you don't mind telling, I'd like to listen. Fukasco pulled over a stool. A long time ago, the wizarding world wasn't as hidden as it is now. Muggles were full of fear and misunderstanding. Witch hunts were everywhere. The hunts peaked in the 14th century, as your history of magic probably says. Dylan had read the book thoroughly and knew what Fukasco meant, but he still wanted the extra details. How did they identify wizards back then? Fukasco shook his head. There were so many methods, most of them absurd. Some would throw people into water. If they sank, they were declared ordinary and let go, but if they floated, they were called witches and burned. Others used so-called magical stones that were really just tricks. Wizards are people too. Some were careless and got persecuted, but most hid well. So how did wizards resist? Dylan asked. Mostly by hiding and running. Fukasco shrugged. Wizards could feign death with magic. There were never huge open wars between muggles and wizards. Many people who were executed weren't even wizards. Lots of wizards simply used magic to vanish. Isolt Sayre, for example, one of Ilvermorny's founders, sailed to the Americas when the hunts were worst in Europe. It wasn't until the Ministry enacted the International Statute of Secrecy that the witch hunts subsided. That's pretty much what Professor Binns says, Dylan observed. Fukasco laughed. Looks like I need to work on my storytelling. Seeing Dylan's sundae was almost gone, he scooped another serving into a to-go cup. Take this with you. Dylan stood and took the chocolate raspberry sundae. I wanted to try something different, but this is fine. Come back often. I have a feeling we'll become good friends. I'll support your shop, Dylan said, smiling, and left with the packed sundae. Outside, several aurors patrolled the street, but Dylan paid them no mind and walked on. Maybe it was because it was our first meeting. He talked a lot, but didn't actually say anything of substance. He shrugged. I'll drop by more. Fukasco seemed like a decent man. It was a pity, Dylan thought, that he would later be captured by Voldemort and die, then no more free delicious ice cream. If I ever meet little Voldy again, I'll give him a good talking to, and spread my name, Karthus the Fool. After Fukasco's, Dylan ran to a Quidditch supplies shop and bought 10 Nimbus 2000s to give as birthday presents. Then he went on a shopping spree through Diagon Alley, buying magic books, weeklies, monthlies, yearbooks. He bought everything. He only stopped after spending tens of thousands of galleons. Before, ordering things by owl didn't count as achievements for me. This time, I came in person and spent so much at once. Surely that'll unlock a few achievements, right? Dylan muttered. He'd noticed previously that purchases could trigger achievements, sometimes with minor rewards like a little money or a material item, but getting notifications constantly would interrupt his studies. So he usually disabled achievement pop-ups and checked them in batches later. He hadn't looked in a while, so he ducked into a dessert shop, ordered a small cake, sat at a table, ate, and opened the system panel. When he clicked the magic scroll icon, a list of achievements popped up. Achievement: I just love spending money. If I have money, I must spend it. It feels terrible not to. Requirement: personally spend 10,000 galleons. Reward: pet space suitcase. Oh, a suitcase? What's this pet space thing? Dylan stared at the prompt. He hadn't expected a reward for spending 10,000 galleons to be a suitcase, especially one tied to pet space. His mind jumped to Newt's magical creature case. Not just an undetectable extension charm pocket, but a living environment that could simulate swamps, snowy biomes, an entire small world. Creating something like that required not only the charm, but complicated spells and rare materials. Dylan extracted the achievement reward into his system inventory. It appeared instantly. It actually works. He went to read the suitcase's description. Item: pet space suitcase. From now on, little 3, little 4, little 5, and little 6 can all be kept here. Aren't you happy? Abilities: space connection, space expansion, internal ecosystem self-circulation, to be unlocked. Pet location and summoning, to be unlocked. Ecosystem, to be unlocked. Dylan brightened at the abilities listed, but most were grayed out as to be unlocked. Great, he felt like rolling his eyes. You give me the reward, and then tell me it's half a reward. Do I have to unlock the rest by achievements? How am I supposed to know which achievements unlock which abilities? Then he noticed the "to be unlocked" tags were clickable. He clicked one and a prompt opened. Ability to be unlocked. Internal ecosystem self-circulation. 1,000 galleons. Dylan stared at the line of zeros until the numbers swam. 1 million? Are you serious? 1 million galleons. He had learned from previous system shenanigans, like beautifying wizard robes and unlocking advanced spells, that the system liked to milk him, but this was outrageous. One ability costs 1 million galleons. I could have someone make me a magical creature case for less. He clicked to view the ability's details. Internal ecosystem self-circulation. No matter how many ecosystems you unlock, they integrate and transition naturally, preventing ecosystem conflicts, regulating climate, and maintaining the water cycle of the entire ecosystem, etc. After reading, Dylan fell quiet. Then he muttered, "It's just ecological circulation. I still don't think it's worth 1 million. Besides, the ecosystems themselves also had to be unlocked. If he didn't pay for self-circulation, an ecosystem might collapse and he'd lose his investment. He might have to pay again to undo the damage before setting a new one up. It all sounded very likely. But 1 million, he groaned. He experimented a little and saw he could also pay in pounds. 10 million pounds? That's robbery. He shut his eyes, wanting to avoid seeing more prices. After a long moment, he opened them and straightened. Maybe it's time my name, Karthus, rang out through the wizarding world. If the system demanded 1 million for one ability, what would other abilities or future items cost? His parents could never earn that. Let others work hard. I'll just take their money, he thought, remembering the 40,000 galleons he'd earned from Mr. Borgin. The idea had possibilities. Done. He didn't look at the rest of the locked abilities. Since the internal circulation ability was listed first, the system clearly wanted him to unlock that one first. Otherwise, the other abilities might be useless. He looked at the 2 unlocked basic abilities. Space connection. Your pet space suitcase is connected to your pet space. Your pets can travel between the 2 at any time. A straightforward connection. Can I close the passage? He wondered. At that instant, a locked ability popped up. Ability to be unlocked. Autonomous space passage closure. Price to be unlocked, 100,000 galleons. You're unbelievable, Dylan said. He checked the next unlocked ability. The suitcase's space can always accommodate your pets. Your pets will never feel crowded. That's it. Dylan clicked to see the size. 100,000 cubic meters. Not bad. Relieved, he realized that to expand the space further, he'd probably have to pay more. But for now, 100,000 cubic meters was more than enough for his two pets. Even when Norberta grew up, there'd be room for her daily activities, just not enough to let her fly around without restraint. And there's no ecosystem yet, so what would she even fly in? He muttered. Overall, this briefcase can be gradually upgraded in the future to unlock more functions. After a moment's thought, Dylan accepted that. He realized he didn't need to fear the system asking for money. If it never asked, that would be suspicious. Besides, it was precisely because he had this briefcase that he had somewhere to put money and things to spend it on. If he didn't have anything to buy, what good was having money? Dylan smiled inwardly and convinced himself. At least with 100,000 cubic meters of space, if I run into other magical creatures, I can take them in and raise them. He slowly ate half of the small chocolate cake in front of him. Dark chocolate, not bad. Dylan loved chocolate and sweets. Now I've got Umber Shadow and a dragon. The unicorn is at least a mobile storehouse for materials. Between those three magical creatures, he already had access to a lot of resources. Brewing many potions required their blood, horns, and fur, and those ingredients could sometimes replace other materials he was missing. The success so far had made Dylan greedy. He wanted more and more magical creatures under his command. This briefcase was the start of that plan. He scooped another bite of cake and muttered, "When I met Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest and fed Beta, I saw that unicorn again. I only took a little blood, and then I never saw it. Did it run away?" He felt a little affronted. Did that unicorn mean to be friendly and then flee after he'd taken its blood twice? Humph. If I'd known, I'd have sent 1,000 Imperios at it. Maybe I'd have even triggered an achievement and turned it into my pet. He pouted, then glanced at the next achievement. Achievement, I have the Nimbus. A young wizard, and he has the most high-end flying broom. Aren't you proud? Requirement to unlock. Possess a generally recognized high-end flying broomstick within 3rd year. Achievement reward, flying talent plus 10. Flying talent? Meh. Dylan wasn't that keen on flying. Even superb broomwork couldn't match apparition for utility. Apparition also didn't depend on environment once his skill reached a certain level. Still, it was a free reward, so he'd take it. He scrolled down and found the achievement he'd just earned in Nocturne Alley. Achievement, I, the Fool, never keep my word. As everyone knows, the Fool doesn't have to keep his word, business deals included. He's the Fool. Requirement to unlock. Obtain high profits through fraud. Achievement reward, max level random dark arts 1. Achievement proclaim me king. The old Dark Lord is done. It's time for a new king to rule. Let the scepter change hands. Possess initial believers 10-10. Fanatical believer. Achievement reward, fool's demeanor plus 1. I am the Jinx. Description, instead of dealing with you myself, why not watch you tear each other apart? Requirement to unlock, make your enemies turn on each other for you. Max level Jinx. Achievement, Dark Nouveau Rich. Your name is beginning to spread. Requirement to unlock, the name you established exists concurrently in the Ministry of Magic and the Wizarding world. Achievement reward, Dark Arts talent, super invincible double affinity. Achievement, you ran into it yourself. Description, a rising elite of the dark wizarding world, destined to be the Dark Lord, actually got ambushed? They must have wanted to die. Casually use an unforgivable curse to deal with someone who attempts to ambush you. Achievement reward, max level random dark arts plus 1. Dylan grinned at the list. When Professor Snape had taught him dark arts, Dylan had already seen how useful a high dark arts affinity could be. As soon as a spell landed in his hands, a mere glance could raise his proficiency 3 to 5 levels. With a little practice, he'd rocket to 6, 7, even 8, sometimes right to max level. Counter curses for dark arts became much easier to learn too. It was thoroughly satisfying. He'd already earned a dark arts affinity reward after mastering the 3 unforgivable curses. Now, another dark arts talent super invincible double affinity popped up, and after claiming it, he felt his grasp of other dark arts subtly deepen. He wanted to go back and start reading right away. He was about to check the new dark arts when another system message blinked up. Message: you have achieved a new achievement. Dylan reopened the achievement panel and stared at the latest notification. Achievement: Dark Supernova. No renowned dark wizard would not be on the Ministry of Magic's wanted list. Requirement to unlock: be wanted by the Ministry of Magic. Achievement reward: max level random dark arts +1. The Ministry of Magic is after me? That wasn't surprising. He chewed the chocolate mini cake with disinterest and opened the sundae Fukosco had given him, eating both. Ms. Maeve would nag me if she knew I'd eaten so many sweets today. Dylan hadn't intended to establish dominance when he'd gone to Nocturne Alley this time. Some people had just blinders on and wanted to cause trouble, ambushing him, for example. What could he do but use an unforgivable curse? He'd even been merciful, restraining himself from Avada Kedavra and using Crucio instead. For that, he bristled at titles like Dark Lord, Dark Supernova, and Dark Nouveau Rich the system kept assigning. At most, he thought of himself as a minor menace, not some national calamity. But the Ministry moves fast, he said aloud. I'd barely finished with those aurors before they issued a wanted order. Although he hadn't seen a wanted poster yet, the system had already popped the achievement. It wouldn't be long before another wanted dark wizard appeared somewhere in the world. This time I mastered 3 more max-level dark spells, and even Jinx is maxed. I'm getting closer to the index. Dylan's current goal was to master 10 max-level spells, each up to 3,000 proficiency. He'd already broken into double digits for max-level spells and was steadily pushing toward many more, a very good sign. 3 black stars above the system panel descended at once. Ethereal images swirled around Dylan, human souls, animal spirits. He raised his wand once, and sharp, piercing wails erupted. Spirits scrambled away, those too slow were hit by his spell. Their forms contorted and dispersed as if dissolved, though they hadn't been entirely destroyed so much as banished. He raised his wand again. A pitch-black beam shot from the tip and struck a rhinoceros soul. It gave a muffled roar, shuddered, and disintegrated before his eyes. Its soul broke into tiny lights. One shining golden shard flew to Dylan. When he absorbed it, he felt he could almost understand the rhinoceros spirit's cries. He waved his wand a 3rd time. Umber shadow swept over the sky, and with a crack, a bolt of lightning as thick as a bucket struck down. The ground shook, cracked, and jagged rocks split apart. A huge pit collapsed, cold mist rising from it. At the bottom, he could see what looked like a bottomless lake, a mirror-smooth surface that radiated a bone-deep cold. Black light danced on the water, and then from the lake's black depths, countless living shadows surged up. One by one, wet and fairy crawled out. Pale skin, hollow eyes, the stench of decay. They dragged their heavy feet and shuffled from the lake to the shore until, before Dylan's eyes, they formed a vast, eerie army. Congratulations, you have mastered the max-level spell, Expulso Curse. Congratulations, you have mastered the max-level spell, Soul Bob Tongue. Congratulations, you have mastered the max-level spell, Mortis Revinio, Return of the Undead. These 3 spells, Dylan raised an eyebrow. Just their names sounded like dark arts. Simultaneously, detailed information about each filled his mind, spells he had never heard or learned before. Expulso Curse, as the name implied, expelled or drove away creatures like ghosts. He grinned at the thought. If I used this at Hogwarts, could I clear out all the previous headmasters in Old Deng's office? He quickly pushed the image away. What's the point of driving them off if you can't kill them? Soul Bob Tongue allowed him to understand other beings' languages. That included different human tongues and even languages of other species. It even let him extract a language fragment from a shattered soul. The system's example showed killing a creature and breaking its soul to pull out a useful linguistic fragment. That's brutal. Does that mean, to learn German or French, I'd have to kill someone? Dylan rubbed his chin. Or to know a unicorn's language, I'd have to kill another unicorn or a dragon. That's not practical. Using Imperio or Legilimency to glean thoughts is easier. even if it doesn't let you master the language. Still, any magic tied to souls and language had potential. Mastering a max-level spell like that would let him infer and learn other related magic more easily. Mortis Revenio, the return of the undead, made him think of the Inferi army that Old Deng and Harry had once faced in a lake. It's intimidating, but Old Deng took them out with Lumos Solum, Dylan recalled. Not sure how useful it is to me, but if I was Karthus, getting people famous by raising the dead would help spread my name. He tapped the table with his fingers, combined the cake and ice cream, and took a big bite. Cold and delicious. There were many more achievements to skim through. Most were minor, and Dylan passed over them until two new ones caught his eye. Achievement: a perfectly concluded first year. Description: after an entire school year, you've earned your professor's favor and your classmates' respect, and your house has won the House Cup. A perfect ending. Requirement to unlock: achieve outstanding in all assessments. Gryffindor wins the House Cup. Achievement reward: logical thinking +10, magical strength +10, mental strength +10. Achievement: first in grade. Description: the first time you become the undisputed top among the four houses. Even if someone ties you, everyone knows they're not really as good. They just have a name advantage. Requirement to unlock: achieve first place in the first year final exams. Achievement reward: unlock Lord Voldemort's ability vault and select one ability to master and make your own. Dylan's mind felt sharper, his thinking ability noticeably improved, a useful boost for reading. My magic's improved a bit too, not bad. He nodded in satisfaction, but the second reward made him frown. Why would coming first in my class reward me with Lord Voldemort's abilities? That doesn't make sense. As Karthus, he'd used Unforgivables against ambushers, wrung money out of Mr. Borgin, and even used Imperio to make Aurors fight each other. For those achievements, dark arts rewards made sense. Why should academic excellence net him Lord Voldemort's skills, and specifically spells associated with Voldemort? He could only react. Oh my, that's amazing! When he opened the vault, Dylan was almost blinded by the sheer number of spells Lord Voldemort had mastered. Even for a wizard of his age, the list was enormous, perhaps more than many adult wizards knew. Dylan flipped through Quicksilver fast. Modern dark arts, ancient rituals. Lord Voldemort's research into magic was broader than almost anyone living. Old Deng had been surprised Voldemort hadn't died from Avada Kedavra, an event that upended magical assumptions. But Voldemort's breadth of study and talent explained a lot. Can I pick one of these and instantly copy Voldemort's proficiency? Or will I have to learn it? Dylan wondered. Many of these spells were attractive, but often came with caveats or counters. Many required grotesque, bloody rituals in addition to a twisted mind. The process was complicated enough to give him a headache. Maybe that was part of why the Unforgivable Curses existed. Voldemort had been lazy about ritual complexity. Dylan already had several max-level dark arts, and his offensive power was effectively maxed. For defense, Old Deng had taught him Expecto Patronum. The kinds of magic he lacked now were not raw offense, but subtler areas: language, soul magic, and ritual mastery. Things these new achievements and rewards might help him shore up. Chapter 111, Mastering the Flying Charm, Tenebris Volo. A stop at the Weasleys on the way. No one has taught me apparition yet, and I don't dare try it on my own. Dylan sifted through Lord Voldemort's skill library. After discarding magics that required elaborate rituals and dismissing the Unforgivable Curses, he was already at max level, so those added nothing. He faced a choice. He could try to learn apparition, the near teleportation technique, or he could learn Voldemort's self-developed flying charm. Apparition would solve long and short distance movement instantly, but it demanded utter precision. The flying charm, on the other hand, could compensate for mobility during combat. It let a caster become a drifting mist and maneuver freely without a broom. Dylan remembered how Snape had used that flight to slip past McGonagall's spells, vanish through a window, and leave Hogwarts. It was tempting. Apparition was usually something you were taught in 6th or 7th year, and given how the Hogwarts staff already saw him, Snape, McGonagall, Flitwick, even Dumbledore, if they thought he could handle advanced magic early, they might have taught him. But Dumbledore was far more skilled at apparition than Voldemort. Learning apparition from Voldemort, who hadn't maxed it out himself, felt like a waste. Besides, Voldemort's flying charm had a particular advantage. It could be used reliably while fighting, without the split-second risk that fumbling an apparition during an intense duel might tear the caster apart or blow them to pieces. If Dylan planned to make the fool Karthus famous and provoke many duels this summer, he needed a flight method he could use reflexively under pressure. There was another consideration: the briefcase. The more abilities Dylan unlocked in it, the sooner its full potential would become available, and that required money. Quick, reliable mobility in fights would let him keep up the fool's work and keep the coin flowing. Weighing everything, Dylan decided to learn Lord Voldemort's flying charm. He had barely made the decision when the system updated. Message: Congratulations! You have mastered a level 7 spell, Tenebris Volo, Shadow Mist Flight. Dylan closed his eyes. The flying charm's specifics unfurled in his mind like a map, a weave of transfiguration and dark arts, elegant and raw. Learning it unlocked subtle improvements in his understanding of other dark magics as well. When he opened his eyes, he reflected on how rare the spell had seemed in the original story. Voldemort and Snape were the only ones who knew it there. But now, in this world, things might be different. In some adaptations, it looked like both good and evil wizards could turn into smoke and fly. Had the spell spread among the elite? Had Voldemort shown it to trusted followers, or had others refined it independently? Dylan thought it plausible. Voldemort liked to teach, and Snape had been one of his most trusted lieutenants. If the flying charm had been demonstrated and improved upon in Death Eater meetings, it might have propagated, at least quietly, through influential circles. Even if most witches and wizards couldn't invent an entirely new spell, they could personalize existing ones. All the more reason for him to master it. If it really was being kept secret by a select few, he wanted to know it too. With the spell embedded in his skills, Dylan finished his sundae and cake and began thinking about practical matters. He'd originally planned to browse the black market for exotic living magical creatures, but with Auror's prowling and the trouble that entailed, smuggling wasn't an option. Ordinary creatures were available through legal channels, but weren't interesting. Rare ones required risk he wasn't ready to take. Besides, for the fool's persona to build mystique, he needed to be selective in appearances. Overexposure would only strip away the mystery. He tidied up, intending to buy a few trinkets in Diagon Alley to decorate his briefcase. Even now, before all of its functions unlocked, the case could be organized. Like Newt Scamander's suitcase, it had a disguise layer, an internal space that didn't present itself to muggles. In time, he could divide it into zones, cast a Fidelius charm if needed, and make it into a small private world where his parents could feel comfortable if their son's life ever became dangerous. For now, he didn't rush. His proficiency with the Fidelius charm wasn't high yet. After leaving Diagon Alley, he went into the Muggle world to buy practical items, food, mechanical parts, and gadgets, voice-activated lights, among other conveniences. Time drifted. Almost a month passed. For over half of it, Dylan had slipped back into the fool persona. Karthus. He haunted dark lanes, robbed crooked dark wizards who tried to prey on him, and took their gold. It wasn't Mr. Borgin-level wealth, but several thousand galleons here and there added up. 50,000 at a time. When ambushers came for him on the dark paths, he made sure the Reaper got what he sowed. The latest haul in his hand felt weighty and satisfying. 1,000,000 galleons sounded like a fortune, and in a sense it was. If each person were worth 10,000 galleons, he'd only need 100 contributors. If a dozen were as generous as Borgin, he'd be set in no time. The problem was finding enough marks willing to walk the dark path, and the Auror sweeps had made the black market sparse. Lately, he'd been waiting a long time to encounter daring thieves. 2 days had passed before he finally ran into someone bold enough to try an ambush. He slipped the shadow ring onto his finger and vanished. After changing clothes in a safe alley, Dylan checked his messages. Ron Weasley had written, Harry was visiting, and they'd invited him over. Dylan had nothing pressing at home. His parents were away for another trip. They'd decided, impatient to travel while Dylan was less busy before school restarted, to leave for a holiday. Dylan had refused to tag along. He'd felt like a third wheel the last time. Now the house was empty, which freed him to keep working the dark roots. He shrugged off a twinge of disappointment and accepted Ron's invitation. Besides, he'd picked up a few little wrapped boxes from his last mark. They'd make tidy gifts. He put the shadow ring away and shot into the sky. After mastering Tenebris Volo, he rarely rode a broom purely for travel, but for visiting friends, he felt it was more polite to arrive the ordinary way. The Weasleys' house, the Burrow, was only a short hop out of Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon. As he approached, he dispelled the mist-shaped charm and the shadow ring's concealment, mounted his new Nimbus 2000, and glided down toward the crooked, ramshackle home. From above, the Burrow looked charmingly ramshackle, at least 4 stories, tilted and patched like a building of enchanted blocks. Red-tiled roofs bristled with chimneys, and the whole place seemed capable of collapsing in a whimsical heap at any moment. A yard crowded with a chicken coop, broom shed, garage, and even a pigsty surrounded a messy vegetable plot. It was perfectly domestic and utterly functional. On landing, Dylan spotted Molly Weasley at the doorway. She stood with that familiar warm expression, though her eyes were sizing him up the way mothers do. "At this hour, child, is there something you need?" she asked. Dylan grinned and leaned into a deliberate display of charm. "Oh, you're so lovely. You make the flowers look pale in comparison. You must be Mrs. Molly, right?" Molly's surprise softened into a flustered laugh. The compliment had clearly gone to her head. "I am." She squinted at him. "You're Dylan?" He introduced himself properly. "I'm Ron's roommate, Dylan Hawkwood. Has he mentioned me?" Molly blinked. She had expected a child, and she'd seen a wizard land and assumed it was an adult. Standing before her was a tall teen, and that confused her. "You're much taller than I imagined. Ron's told me about you. Fred and George have as well. They say you're a clever fellow, popular with the professors." "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "Ron and the others aren't back yet. I'm waiting for them." "Not home?" Dylan asked. Molly bustled him in and began filling his arms with parcels of sweets. "These are Ron's share. Help yourself." Dylan accepted the bundles, and a cup of hot tea Molly pressed into his hands. He sat on the sofa with an easy, polite posture and took the cup. "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley." He meant it. Molly relaxed, voice softening. "You're very polite. If only Ron and his brothers made me worry so little. You don't know, those lads honestly." Her sentence cut off abruptly. A sound drifted from outside, a stuttering, unfamiliar roar. Dylan leaned forward, listening. "Is that a car engine?" Chapter 112. "Oh my God, your parents abandoned you again?" Boom, boom, boom. The moment the engine roared, Molly Weasley jumped up from the bench. Dylan blinked and pushed himself to his feet. Molly, red with anger, strode out the door like a storm. Dylan could tell whoever was outside was in for it. He rose slowly and followed. When he got close, Molly's normally gentle voice had turned to a stinging stream of reproach. "You, how dare you take the car without permission? Do you know how dangerous that was? What if the Ministry of Magic had seen you? Oh, thank goodness you're back safe and sound. Do you know how worried I've been about your safety?" Her words came in a rush, breathless and furious. Dylan felt oddly like Ron, being scolded by his mum. Ron was pressed between Fred and George, heads bowed, looking thoroughly chastened. Harry was stepping out of the car behind them, cheeks flushed and embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Molly," Harry said, looking at his toes. "They came to pick me up. I didn't expect it to be like that. I'm sorry I made you worry, but I'm glad Ron and the others could come get me." Molly paused. Hearing Harry's quiet voice softened her. She had heard enough from Ron to know how badly Harry had been treated at the Dursleys. "Hello, Harry. How was the journey?" She glanced at the sky. Dawn was coming. She'd been fretting all night for those naughty boys. Even so, the 3 of them had managed to get Harry home safely, but Molly wasn't finished with a lesson for Ron and the twins. "Even if you were picking Harry up, you should have told me. You don't just drive off without permission. What if something had happened to you, or to Harry?" Ron froze, incredulous. The twins lifted pleading faces. "Are we not your favorites anymore?" Fred and George complained. "No, after this, it's Ginny," Molly announced flatly. "No," the twins howled. Harry had been nervous at first, but hearing the twins howl made him almost laugh. Molly herself stifled a smile, then continued lecturing Ron and the twins for a while longer. The scolding finally trailed off when Harry's stomach gave a loud growl. Molly shot a glance at the three boys, then softened. Are you hungry, dear? Come inside. I'll get you something to eat. And your friend Dylan, he just arrived not long ago. At Dylan's name, Ron looked up, surprised and pleased. Dylan? He got my letter and came then? Where is he? Harry glanced into the house. Dylan stepped out from behind the door at just the right moment. He'd been hanging back so Molly could finish her scolding. It's really Dylan. Hi, good evening. No, good morning, Fred and George chorused. Dylan waved. Hello. Seeing no more admonishment from Molly, Ron hurried over. You should have told me you were coming. We could have picked you up. He didn't finish the sentence before a shiver ran down his spine. He glanced back, eyes wide. Quick, get inside. He shepherded Dylan into the house. The twins came in too, surrounding him with chatter. Only Molly and Harry remained on the doorstep. Don't be nervous. Come on in. I'm sorry you had to see that, Molly said kindly. It was Harry's first time at the burrow, and at such an hour, he looked a little embarrassed but obeyed and stepped inside. Molly shut the car doors, closed the front door, and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The burrow wasn't large. The sofa Dylan had been sitting on was small. There was only one. Soon everyone crowded around the dining table, shoulders brushed, knees bumped. With Fred and George fueling the conversation and Ron and Harry excited to see Dylan after a month, the young wizards filled the room with lively chatter. Oh my goodness, your parents actually left you again and went off traveling? Ron exclaimed. Molly, cracking eggs to fry, paused and muttered, Poor child. Dylan smiled. They're usually busy. This time they took some time off to be with me. We've been together for days. Let them go. I can come visit you lot. That's right, Ron agreed eagerly. Harry fidgeted at the table, eyes constantly scanning the room, fingers tugging at his sleeves. Dylan noticed he was still nervous. Even the twins' laughter didn't fully relax him. Dylan pulled a chair, went to the teapot Molly had made, and picked it up. He produced his wand, murmured a small charm, and a soft glow feathered from its tip. Steam soon rose from the teapot. He poured a cup for Harry. Have some tea, Dylan said. It'll calm you down. Molly's very kind and lovely. Didn't she give you a present at Christmas? Harry took the cup with both hands, warmth seeping into his fingers and along his shoulders. He relaxed a little. You're right, he said. Molly, who had almost finished frying the eggs, came in with a large plate. There you are, you sensible little things. Eat quickly. You must be starving. She set plates for everyone, then went back to fry sausages and toast. Passing Harry, she ruffled his hair. You didn't do anything wrong, child. It was Ron's fault. Ron went silent. The twins offered muffled protests. If you hadn't replied to Ron, Arthur and I were ready to come and fetch you ourselves, Molly continued. Don't listen to those mischievous rascals and think we wouldn't worry or that we'd sneak off without you. Ron buried his head in his hands and speared an egg. Harry, feeling Molly's kindness, smiled and murmured, Thank you. There's no need to be polite. Eat up before it gets cold. She patted his head and retreated to the kitchen. The eggs disappeared in 2 bites apiece. After breakfast, Harry held his tea and glanced around. He leaned toward Dylan. Is your home like this? It feels very wizarding. Dylan looked around. Despite its size, the burrow buzzed with life, moving photographs on the walls showing the Weasleys through the years, group shots, an old fireplace, odd trinkets on the mantel, a golden hourglass, small wizarding figurines. A shelf of well-thumbed magical books wore soft, faded spines. There aren't any magic items at my house, Dylan said. My parents are muggles. Harry nodded. Mine don't have anything either. He hesitated, then added dryly. Or maybe something cursed the Dursleys into being mean and stupid. Dylan stifled a laugh. Harry still carried the edge of unhappiness from the Dursleys. Ron leaned closer. You arrived in the middle of the night, didn't you? Dylan nodded. I flew in on my broom and saw your mum waiting at the door. For a moment, I thought she was welcoming me. Of course she was, came a voice from the kitchen. You didn't even send me a letter. I thought you weren't coming, Ron complained. Then you just snuck over? Dylan shrugged. I was bored at home. I'd planned to wander if you lot were asleep, but I couldn't wait. Ron's face fell. But you flew here? We signed that promise before leaving school. Weren't we not supposed to use magic outside? We did sign it, but it never said you couldn't fly a broom, Dylan said with a grin. Ron blinked, stunned. What? We can use magic outside? Fred and George told me. You lied to me, Ron accused the twins. Fred and George exchanged guilty looks, then laughed. Not exactly lying, little brother. I knew none of you were paying attention when we signed it, Ron sulked. Dylan waved a hand. Maybe Hermione misunderstood too. At home, you can use charms. Ron remembered the warming charm Dylan had used and blinked. I haven't used a spell properly for a month. I'm rusty. Harry, calmer now, set his cup down and patted Ron's shoulder. Me too. He'd hardly used any magic all month, and his uncle had been worse to him because of it. Dylan looked at Harry. You didn't get rid of the gift I sent? Harry smiled. I got it. Dobby tried to stop me going back to school. He wouldn't let Dudley take the present. Thank you. I love it. A real golden snitch, perfect for decorating the dormitory. Dylan grinned. I found it in Diagon Alley at the Quidditch shop. It was marked limited edition, but when I took the last one, the shopkeeper popped another on the shelf. Marketing, I think. That's clever, the twins crowed, laughing. Molly brought over sausages and toast and buttered Harry's and Dylan's slices herself. Hey, Mum, why not ours? The twins complained. Perhaps because mischievous rascals don't deserve it, Molly replied with a look. A small voice piped up. You're so noisy. Dylan turned to see a little girl with flaming hair in her pajamas, clutching a doll and rubbing her eyes. When she saw the number of people at the table, she widened her eyes, clapped her doll over her face, and scuttled back upstairs without a word. Dylan and Harry blinked. Ginny's rude. She didn't even say hello, Ron mumbled as he buttered his bread and added a sausage. That's my sister Ginny, he explained. She's gone on about Harry all summer, always asking me to get his autograph. I don't know what she needs them for. Harry's face went blank, as if the idea of his autograph hadn't quite registered. Chapter 113, Execution? I really thought I was listening to a Death Eater. After all, there's hardly anyone in the wizarding world who hasn't heard Harry's legend. To many children, he's a hero, Dylan said with a grin. Harry scratched his head, embarrassed. The Weasley twins looked at Dylan. You sound just like my dad. Exactly, Dylan laughed. You've grown a lot since we last saw you, Fred observed. You're almost taller than us now. If you said you were a third or fourth year, people would believe it. Ron and Harry stared. At first they hadn't noticed, but on closer inspection, it was true. You're a head taller than me, Dylan. Ron's eyes widened. Did you drink some sort of growth potion? Harry blinked and compared Dylan to himself. He felt like a dwarf. I wonder when I'll grow. Dylan smiled. I eat well, 3 proper meals, and that helps. Practicing spells regularly also gets your magical circulation going, which encourages growth. And if you don't want to go back to your aunt's house this summer, you can come stay with my family. My parents aren't always home. He pouted theatrically. The food I cook would give the academy a run for its money. Eat well, and you'll shoot up in no time. Harry brightened. Okay. Ron rattled his head. No. What's the point of you two staying by yourselves? Come to our house. We can play together. He glanced toward Molly. And your grades are brilliant. You can help me with my studies. Dylan didn't refuse. I'll come if I can. The topic drifted off, and Ron went back to his bread, muttering, It must be because I only eat junk every morning that I haven't grown. Molly Weasley, just 2 steps from the kitchen, froze with a look that could cut. The dining table was right beside the cooking area, so she'd heard everything. I'm sorry, dear, but everyone eats the school food and gets taller. Why haven't you? Ron clamped his mouth shut, dared not answer, and turned to Harry instead. Your aunt gives you leftovers and sometimes won't even let you eat properly. You must be malnourished. If you ask me, don't go back there. Whether you come to Dylan's or our house, you'll be welcome. Fred and George nodded emphatically. Harry smiled shyly. Thank you. After finishing his bread, Ron yawned. Mom, I want to. You want to help get rid of those gnomes in the garden? Wonderful, Molly said. What? Ron blinked. Thoughtful boy you are, Ron. Fred, George, go with him. The twins looked as rueful as quails before their mother. Those gnomes have messed up the garden again. But Mom, we were up all night. Oh, how pitiful. But didn't I tell you to go to bed? All right, the twins surrendered. We'll help. Harry hesitated, then spoke up. Madam, I'll come too. Molly cut him off. Oh, poor Harry and Dylan must be tired after traveling. Why don't you two go rest in Ron's bed for a while? Hey, Mom, That's not fair, Ron protested. Molly feigned innocence. What's unfair? Do you want your guests to do your work for you? I wonder where you got such rudeness. Ron wilted. Dylan chuckled and tried to smooth things over. I'm fine, madam. I'm not tired. Besides, there are no gnomes at my house. I'll go help clear them. How sweet. If you insist, you can go and play with Ron, but don't expect them to do the dirty work for you. The twins cheerily obliged. Ron looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and Harry followed Dylan straight away. I'll go too. Okay, but don't tire yourselves, Molly warned. Dylan looked at the boys, still excited but very sleepy, and stroked his chin. Do you mind if I use a spell on Ron and them? Of course not, Molly said. If they bully you, teach them a lesson. Ron's eyes went wide. Mom, he doesn't even know what spells you've taught him. Dylan grinned. Serenitatis Lux. He twirled his wand, and a warm, gentle magic washed over Harry, Ron, Fred, and George. The lingering fatigue eased away. Their yawns came more from refreshed contentment than tiredness. Wow, the twins said, rubbing their eyes. This actually makes you feel awake. Why didn't we learn this at school? Ron, quick to brag, said, This is a spell Dylan learned from a professor. Harry and I already know it. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Ron faltered, then insisted, Harry's mastered it. Have you? The twins teased him. Dylan flicked his wand. Scourgify. The dishes and cutlery on the table glided together. Wingardium Leviosa. They floated toward the kitchen, and Molly praised him. Very good spell work. Thank you, madam. Dylan rose and casually cleaned Harry's teacup before they all headed for the garden. Sunlight pierced through wet clouds and lit the messy, cheerful garden. Everywhere were overgrown paths, a vegetable patch choked with weeds, marigolds tangled in the flower beds, and rose vines sprawling over hedges. The twins plunged into the shrubbery and in a flash hauled out two struggling gnomes. It's these little blighters, always sneaking into our garden. Dylan studied them. Small, about 10 to 12 inches tall, wrinkled, ugly, with big round heads and enormous pointed ears, their orange-yellow eyes bulging. They're awful, Harry said. Uglier than mandrake roots, Ron agreed. The twins laughed and treated the gnomes like toys, grabbing their shins and whipping them like tethered balls. With a whoosh, they flung the gnomes over the fence. Dylan frowned. Just like that! Just like that! Fred grinned. Near Dylan's feet, a gnome peered from a muddy hole. Dylan arched an eyebrow and cast Petrificus Totalis. The gnome froze mid-burrow. Dylan levitated it. No way he was touching those things. He let it float at arm's length. Throwing them out doesn't really solve it. They'll just dig back or breed more. Ron was chasing down a particularly nimble gnome when he tripped over a tool and nearly face-planted in the mud. Fred materialized and caught the gnome mid-leap. George grabbed another. Dylan, watching, said casually, Why not just execute them with magic? Fred held the thrashing gnome and stared. Execute? He snorted. Sounds like something a Death Eater would say. He gave the gnome a shake, let it go, and flung it over the fence. George did the same. These gnomes are a nuisance, but they don't harm the crops. We can use magic if needed, said George. Dad says gnomes churn the soil and help vegetables grow. He says they're actually interesting, good for catching when you're bored. Dylan watched them fly. He flicked his wand, and the levitating gnomes sailed out as well. Wizards used magic in practical ways, and gnomes ate anything, sometimes even weeds, so they weren't as destructive as Muggles imagined. If anything, the Weasleys treated gnome catching as a game. The bushes rustled. The gnomes who had been hiding began to emerge, some stumbling from the soil, one by one, and each scurried to the nearest human and obediently lined up at their feet. Every gnome ordered itself into a neat row and stared up at Dylan as if terrified. The twins burst out laughing. Looks like Dylan scared them. But why don't they fear me? Ron asked, crestfallen. Maybe because you're not scary, the twins said. Ron's face fell. He grunted, grabbed the first gnome by the ankle, swung his arm, and flung it like the others. I'm done with this game, he muttered. I'm tired of catching them. Harry, holding his gnome and seeing the twins' moves, copied them and flung his own. The garden became a chorus of whooshes as Harry, Ron, Fred, and George hurled the small creatures over the fence. Only Dylan stood watching. These gnomes are clever, he mused. He'd been puzzled why the Weasleys didn't just exterminate them. The creatures bred fast, but the family didn't seem inclined to. If a local habitat reached its carrying capacity, Excess gnomes would move elsewhere. Given the Weasleys' attitude, throwing them out and treating them as a seasonal irritation made sense. In short order, Molly's task of clear the gnomes was finished. Fred and George came over. Sleep on the third floor, left side. The big room there is ours. 2 beds. If you and Harry are tired, feel free to sleep in our room. Dylan raised an eyebrow. You not resting? No, we want to ride Harry's broom, the twins said in unison. At that, Dylan unzipped his suitcase and pulled out a Nimbus 2000. I've got another one. If you want to play, you can each have one. But be careful. Your safety, I mean. The twins' eyes lit up. George grabbed the broom, hugging it delightedly. Fred grabbed Dylan in a sudden bear hug. Brilliant. Now we can race and not argue about who goes first. George laughed, clutching the Nimbus. Then he remembered and warned Dylan and Harry. One thing, don't make too much of a mess in our room. The explosive things Fred and I made are still in there. Fred added, try not to cause an explosion. Dylan's mouth twitched. Explode? Really? He clicked his tongue. I suddenly don't feel like resting anymore. Who needs to sleep? Chapter 14. Studying the Jewish Book of Abraham. At the Weasleys, Fred and George exchanged a look, then grinned and burst out laughing. Just kidding. Even if it explodes, at worst it'll just give your hair a new style. Besides, we're only researching this to make some small gadgets. The safety level is pretty high, so don't worry. We'll take the really unsafe ones to Hogwarts to test. Otherwise, Molly'll skin us alive. Dylan pursed his lips and looked at Harry. Going up to rest? He didn't actually plan to sleep. He wanted to read. Ever since he'd bought the Beast Space suitcase, he no longer kept his books in the system's item panel. He'd installed a few small bookshelves inside the space suitcase so he could pull any book out quickly by shelf position. No more rifling through an inventory for ages. After listening to Dylan and the twins, Harry blinked, stepped back, leaned against Ron, and chuckled. I'm not really sleepy. I'll hang out with Ron and them for a bit. You go up and get some rest, Dylan. All right. Dylan shrugged and picked up his suitcase. When the twins noticed, they dropped the Nimbus 2000s they'd been holding and peered at him with curiosity. Dylan, is that a space suitcase? Dylan nodded. Yep, and I just bought this broom too. Their faces lit up. My Merlin, that must have cost a fortune. How much space is inside? You could fit loads of stuff, maybe even ride brooms inside. Dylan shook his head. Nah, I just put a few bookshelves in. Reading's pretty much my only hobby. Fred and George's excitement deflated instantly. Oh, we thought we could ride brooms in it. Dylan waved them away. Go on then. Go play. Once everyone else is awake, Molly might not let you anymore. Good idea. Let's go, they shouted, grabbing their brooms and dashing out. Harry and Ron followed them. Dylan carried his suitcase to the twins' room and paused at the door. He flipped open his palm and a clear crystal ball appeared. Murmuring a quick spell, he sent a tiny image into it. The light inside swirled into mist, and an image formed. He pictured an explosion. He opened the door, and only a few harmless sparks floated out, no blast. Dylan exhaled, relieved. Divination could be useful sometimes. He tucked away the crystal ball and went inside. As if on cue, a small fountain of colorful fireworks shot up from either side of the room. Pretty, harmless, very Fred and George. The room itself surprised him, neat and tidy. The beds were made, quilts rumpled where the twins had lain earlier, the floor clean, the enchanted map on the wall clear, and family photos in polished frames. Molly might not have been in the mood to tidy after discovering her boys missing that night, but she clearly cared for her children. Dylan placed his suitcase by the right bed, cast a Scourgify on himself and the bed, took off his shoes, and sank into the mattress. Despite their modest means, the Weasleys were well cared for. The house itself was held together by magic. Structurally, it should have collapsed, but enchantments kept it upright. Leaning against the headboard in the quiet room, Dylan reached into empty air and pulled out the fragmented scroll he'd been studying, the Book of Abraham the Jew. He preferred keeping special texts in the system panel, but this scroll he'd been reading for weeks. The pages were worn from constant handling. This book's full of symbols and vague notations, he murmured. Even with repetition, parts are still hard to parse, but the more he studied, the more he began to understand. The alchemy described wasn't mere transmutation of base metals into gold. That was superficial. The rituals and energy conversions hinted at transformations on material and spiritual levels, touching on secrets that might lead toward immortality. The fragments were incomplete, but each study session revealed deeper layers, and the magic world felt far more profound than it first appeared. Dylan and Harry ended up staying at the burrow for several days. Dylan hadn't gone out to ply his other identity, Carthus, or to rob wizards. The Weasleys made a pleasant change. Molly fussed over both boys at every meal and bedtime, making sure they'd eaten, slept well, and weren't being tormented by the twins. Harry, who'd recently fled the Dursleys, responded to that warmth. He brightened noticeably, except for small humiliations, like when his socks had holes and he had to wear them anyway. Dylan handed Harry a stack of new socks without a second thought. It struck Dylan how badly Harry had been treated by his aunt and uncle. Arthur Weasley was different, less demonstrative than Molly, but endlessly curious about Muggle things. He would drag Dylan and Harry aside to ask if Muggles could fly without magic and how Muggle flying machines worked, how they were built, and how much they cost. Dylan could explain some things, but studying alchemy didn't make him an engineer. Molly would shoot Arthur a scolding look, and he'd sheepishly go back to pretending to read the paper. Arthur worked in the Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, the division that supervised improper wizard use of Muggle items. Dylan learned that Arthur had helped draft the Muggle Protection Act, but often bent its rules. Arthur had quietly left a loophole. Wizards could legally possess enchanted Muggle items, provided they had no intention to use them. That loophole let Arthur keep tinkering in secret, like the enchanted Ford Anglia the family used, which he'd originally confiscated and modified. The law didn't allow Arthur to drive it, but it also didn't explicitly stop his family from doing so. Those days at the burrow were warmer than Dylan had expected. Conversation and laughter filled the mornings. Toast, Ginny's laughter, George and Fred dragging him into testing prank contraptions. Dylan even thought, idly, of catching a few ghouls to stuff into his suitcase before he left. Ghoul blood had some dark arts uses, after all. One night, Dylan fell asleep thinking of those days. Later, somewhere deep in the night, a violent boom jolted him awake. He rolled over and saw Harry sitting up next to him, equally startled and staring at the twins. Dylan glanced at the sky, still early morning, and then at the twins, a wand suddenly in his hand. If I don't get a satisfactory explanation, you know the consequences. Those two brothers had been unusually quiet recently, so Dylan had chosen the room next to them. Harry had been staying with them after all, and Dylan had planned to switch rooms the next day. To be awakened by an explosion was a shock. Dylan's grip tightened. He almost let a killing curse flare before thinking better of it. The twins, their faces smudged with black soot, only shrugged and scrambled over to his bed, sliding on the floor until they landed at his feet. "Dylan, we swear," they started in unison. "We absolutely didn't do it on purpose." "It was just inspiration hit in the night," George babbled. "Yeah, you know that feeling? It came out of nowhere and we had to grab it," Fred added. "If we hadn't seized it..." Both of them continued, dramatic. "It would have slipped away forever." "It was a brilliant idea. Forgive us, please." They weren't scared of Dylan. They were begging a friend's forgiveness. They went on, weaving excuses and frantic apologies, all the while pretending their midnight experiment had nothing to do with the ghoul that caused trouble the other night, or Dylan's solo trip to the attic. Of course not. Nothing to do with that at all. Chapter 115, Being Condemned by Hermione, How Can Spell Refinement Be Completed in This Way? The two twins in front of him were crying loudly, making a spectacle of themselves, but not a single tear fell. Dylan rolled his eyes. Seeing them making such a fuss, he suddenly flicked his wand. The motion was so swift, the twins didn't even have time to react. They assumed he was about to cast something at them and cried out, "No! Dylan!" The silvery glow from his wand swept past them and settled on the bed across the room instead. The twins froze mid-cry, their screams dying away. Dylan frowned. "What are you yelling for? You'll wake everyone else." They scratched their heads, realizing Dylan hadn't been aiming at them, and breathed a relieved chuckle. "Our room has a silencing charm," Fred explained. "Mum redoes it every day." Dylan's mouth twitched. No wonder the room felt so soundproof. He waved his wand again. All right, I've put a silencing charm on your bed too. If you want to experiment, stay on the bed. As long as your explosions don't go beyond this range, I won't hear anything. Fred and George blinked, then glanced at their not-so-large bed and glanced away awkwardly. Dylan, one began. Isn't this range a bit tight? The other asked. The explosion shouldn't be restricted to one spot. Can't you put another charm on the whole bed? Dylan sighed, flicked his wand a second time, and expanded the silencing field. Now he couldn't even hear the twins whispering as they knelt by the bed, already turning back to their tinkering. All right, Harry, let's sleep. Dylan curled up on the inner side of the bed, tucked the thin quilt around him, and dozed off again. Harry glanced at the twins, who had bounced up from the floor and resumed their research, pulled his own quilt up, and lay back down. Happy times always passed quickly. When Dylan woke again, he found himself at the dining table. Because there were more of them, there weren't enough stools, so Percy usually came down a bit later. Dylan and Harry ate quickly with the Weasleys and were about to head out with Ron when Molly called. It won't be long before school starts. The Hogwarts Owls might bring your book lists and timetables. Do you want to wait? No sooner had she spoken than an owl swooped in through the open window. Dylan and Harry received their terms, book lists and class schedules. Dylan skimmed the book list and found he already owned most of the titles, only a few he'd need to buy. Fred peered at one title. Break with a Banshee? George read another. Travels with Trolls? Ron frowned. What kind of books are these? Why do we have to buy them? Dylan smiled and pointed at the author. The titles were all by Gilderoy Lockhart. Besides the two the twins mentioned, there were several other volumes by the same name. Harry scanned the professor who'd assigned them. These are required by the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, he said. Ron pouted. Does this professor like Lockhart? These titles sound like fluff. You just wait. Hermione will have read them all by the time school starts and will complain how boring they are, he added, grinning at Dylan and Harry. Dylan only smiled faintly. The books, although credited to Lockhart and written in a boastful first-person style, contained detailed, practical accounts of dealing with trolls, banshees, hags, and other creatures. They also included wilderness survival tips. The experiences weren't Lockhart's, but they were real, useful, and vivid, hence their popularity. Dylan had bought a few himself, though not many, and hadn't bothered to buy most of the new required list Lockhart provided this year. Fred and George widened their eyes. Lockhart's books don't come cheap, do they? And the new professor asking everyone to buy them means no secondhand copies, Ron added, suddenly worried. Many of Ron's school things were hand-me-downs. Molly considered this, then looked at Ginny, who sat shyly between Dylan and Harry. There are plenty of things Ginny can use that she already owns. Buying these for the rest of you shouldn't be a big problem. Harry brightened. Ginny's going to Hogwarts? That's brilliant. I bet she'll be in Gryffindor. At that moment, Percy came down. He still wore his neat, proper air, but was more relaxed at home, rolled up sleeves and his prefect badge on display. Molly served him breakfast, and the conversation moved on. When should we go buy these things? Ron asked. You can ask Hermione, Dylan suggested. If she has time, arrange it during the holidays. Good idea, Ron agreed. They wandered around the burrow for the day. The twins were, unsurprisingly, eager to ride their brooms. Ron and Harry followed, laughing. Dylan relaxed with them for a while, then returned to the burrow to read. After dinner, the three boys sat crowded in the small sitting room, sipping tea. The late sun cast a warm gold through the windows. The house still smelled of food, and everything felt cozy. A flapping sound announced an approaching owl. Everyone looked up as a bedraggled bird with ruffled feathers and a wobbly flight staggered through the open window. It's Errol, Ron cried, catching the tired bird as it landed on the table, spilling a few drops of tea. Ron unwound the letter tied to Errol's leg. It's from Hermione, he announced after a quick glance. He looked upset. She scolded me. Dylan had expected as much and smiled. She's not scolding you for inviting Harry and me, but not her, is she? How'd you know? Ron pushed the letter toward them. It began with a torrent of accusations directed at Ron, Harry, and Dylan alike. To the two unreliable boys and Dylan, who was unreliable with them. First of all, Ron, you are truly hopeless. You three have been together every day and you didn't even invite me. I thought you were my best friends. I nearly finished all my homework during the holidays because I've been researching new spells and wanted to share them with you. But you left me out. Harry and Dylan, you aren't fair either. How could you hide this from me with Ron? Especially you, Dylan. You didn't even write me once during the holidays. All right. Ron explained everything in his letter, and given the circumstances, I won't hold it against you. By the way, yesterday I accidentally turned Mum's dinner plate into a sneezing toad. She was quite startled. Are you all managing at Ron's house? I've also received the Hogwarts opening notice, and your idea is good. You finally thought of me. I was thinking the same thing. So when should we go to Diagon Alley? How about the week after next? Or Friday? No need to reply. Just come. This owl is too old, and I can't bear for it to fly again. Promise me you won't put it through that. See you in Diagon Alley. Hermione. Dylan laughed after reading it. Harry blinked. Hermione says she wants to go to Diagon Alley the Friday after next. Shall we go? Sure, Dylan said. We can't stand her up. And Mum doesn't have any carrier pigeons to stand up, Ron grumbled. Then Ron reread the letter more carefully, and his face went pale. Wait, what's this? It's homework, he blurted. Hermione says she's almost finished all her homework? Merlin's pants. There's still more than half a month until school starts. Dylan remembered that Ron and Harry had mostly been playing with the twins in the past days, while he spent much of his time reading at the Burrow. He asked quietly, You haven't started your homework? Harry's head ducked lower. We didn't really do any. You don't want to do homework, do you? Dylan raised an eyebrow. Ron stood, hands on hips. Holidays are for playing. Dylan, you finished yours, right? Harry poked Ron and whispered, Didn't Hermione say Dylan usually doesn't have much homework? Ron stiffened. Something seemed to break inside him. That's not fair. Why doesn't Dylan have as much? Dylan waved a hand, smiling. There's still plenty of time. If you start now, you can finish before term starts. The Burrow's holidays were too comfortable. The boys didn't want to begin work. Dylan guessed what they were thinking, rose, and said, I'm going out to look for unusual plants. Ask Molly about dates for Diagon Alley. He left and began searching the hills and fields around the Burrow. The Weasleys' home was tucked away and even had a fenced hillside the children used as a playground. Muggles usually ignored the place. Dylan rode his Nimbus 2000, flying low and sweeping the fields. He caught an array of small creatures, cockroaches, camel crickets, ants, and stored them in an enchanted suitcase. He had been working on another Unforgivable Curses mastery task and found it couldn't be completed by targeting the same kinds of victims over and over. Relying on duels with dark wizards wasn't safe or efficient, and returning to the Forbidden Forest to hunt Acromantula felt irresponsible. Their numbers weren't infinite, so he focused on smaller creatures that bred quickly. Cockroaches reproduced fast and were large enough for the system's requirements. Acromantula had worked before, and smaller insects should be just as valid. Other insects breed too slowly, he muttered, scooping up another cluster of roaches. Cockroaches multiply fast, good for practice. He also caught several species of spiders. In a memory from his previous life, he'd seen a video of someone smashing a large black spider and a swarm of tiny spiders exploding out, useful to know. After filling his suitcase with a variety of small creatures, Dylan circled back toward the Burrow to plan his next steps. Chapter 116, Crucio Hell and the New Trait, Spreading Pain. When Dylan returned to the Burrow, Harry and Ron were playing outside with the twins, and Ginny had come along too. Dylan slipped into the house alone, went straight to the twins' room, opened his suitcase, and climbed inside. He'd set the space up in 2 sections. In one corner, he'd placed captured cockroaches, spiders, and other small insects. He uncorked a bottle and let a pale liquid flow out. Love potion should work on insects too, right? He muttered. The moment drops of the potion touched the insects, their movements turned frantic. Instinct drove them together and they began to breed in a frenzy. Dylan watched with obvious satisfaction. Not bad. The love potion I improved. Even an elephant would have trouble resisting this. He didn't bother much with the first group. He scattered some vegetable scraps and bits of minced meat among them so they'd have energy when they tired of mating. Then he moved to the second section. The insects there were far more numerous. Let's thin them out a bit, he decided. Dylan flicked his wand. A terrifying burst of light erupted, carrying a numbing cold. Cockroaches writhed and died, some making small sizzling sounds that Dylan imagined as their cries. Still, there weren't enough to satisfy his refinement requirements. Dylan was working on a new trait for Crucio. He'd already unlocked two. One, unrelenting pain, left a lingering pain curse on anyone hit by his Crucio. Even if the victim survived and didn't die of a heart attack, they would keep suffering periodic, wrenching pain afterward. The other he'd activated after the exams at some cost, Crucio Hell. He'd planned to use it on Quirrell to finish a refinement task, but at the time he'd hesitated, worried about being watched. Later, in Nocturne Alley, he'd completed it. Crucio Hell let him stop targeting a single person. Centered on himself, he could toggle a circular energy field 4 meters in radius for 4 seconds. Inside that field, the power of Crucio permeated the area. Everyone caught within it was hit simultaneously. The note attached to the trait had made him look twice. I will open a true hell sooner or later. Dylan had the uneasy suspicion that mastering all traits of the Unforgivable Curses might amount to a domain-like ability. Even if it didn't, the traits for Avada Kedavra and Crucio alone could simulate or create hellish effects, instant death or waves of agonizing pain. Traits could combine too, producing compounding effects. If he activated Crucio Hell and a target survived, unrelenting pain would continue to afflict them afterward. That potential thrilled Dylan. Now he was trying to unlock the third trait of Crucio. The refinement task had been blunt. Step into an ocean of life and let the shadow of Crucio engulf 10,000 living beings. Cast Crucio on 10,000 living creatures to unlock the trait, spreading pain. Dylan grimaced at the numbers. 10,000 people would throw the wizarding world into chaos and likely convince everyone Voldemort had returned, so he decided to do it with insects. 10,000 insects was a lot to gather, but manageable. He spent half a day catching specimens, used some for breeding and some for killing, and set the lot to breeding continuously until he'd built a near self-sustaining population for refinement purposes. The refinement task also came with a crucial restriction. You couldn't complete refinement tasks simultaneously. If he used Crucio on one creature, he couldn't immediately kill it with Avada Kedavra to finish another task. Tasks had to be done separately. That slowed things, so Dylan only activated one spell refinement at a time. Refinements granted powerful new abilities, but for now he preferred to focus on learning more knowledge. He planned to take the refinements one by one and not let them consume all his time. First, Crucio, he told himself. The other Unforgivable Curses can wait. Their tasks are too demanding. Maybe I'll refine Sectum Sempra or Legilimency first, then Occlumency later. Weeks passed. It was almost time for his meeting with Hermione in Diagon Alley. He slept well that night and didn't wake early to study. He woke with Harry and Ron, though the boys had been roused by Molly Weasley. With all this breakfast, you must have worked hard, Molly said as she brought the plates. Dylan took a glass of milk. In front of him sat pan-fried bread with butter, a large pile of fried eggs, and a mountain of bacon. Molly always prepared extra because the children ate so much. "Are you ready?" she asked once they'd eaten their fill. Ron and Harry, and the twins, bundled into their coats. Dylan pulled his wizarding robes from his space and slipped them on. Molly went to the fireplace, took down a flower pot and held it. This is enough for us, but we should get some more. We'll buy some while we're out." "Come on, who's first?" she asked. Dylan stepped into the hearth, pinched a handful of flue powder from the pot, and threw it into the flames. "Diagon Alley," he called. Green fire curled up and swallowed him. He felt a pulling force and began to spin. A whooshing sound filled his ears. After a dizzying moment, his feet hit solid ground and the flames receded. It wasn't as nauseating as apparition, only a faint dizziness lingered. He'd used apparition to reach Diagon Alley once with Professor McGonagall and had been sick afterward. Flue felt gentler. He made a mental note to research the Flue network more later. George, Fred, Ginny, Ron, and the others appeared one by one from the green flames. Molly and Arthur came through shortly after, but Harry did not. "Wait a minute, where did Harry go?" Ginny asked. "Wasn't he with George and the others?" Molly said. "No, he was after us," Ron protested, panic in his voice. He must have mispronounced and been sent somewhere else. What if he ended up in Nocturne Alley? Arthur's face darkened and Molly's expression tightened. Nocturne Alley was the last place she wanted Harry to be alone. Ron, full of alarm, turned to Dylan. Dylan, use your divination. Find Harry. He could be in Nocturne Alley, and that's not a place a young wizard should be. Dylan remembered that Harry had once been sent to the wrong fireplace when using the flue. He wasn't as startled as Ron. Nocturne Alley had been heavily patrolled by Aurors lately. Dylan had dealt with dark wizards there himself. Using the Unforgivable Curses on them had prompted a strong Auror presence afterward, and he knew Harry would likely be fine. Still, he couldn't refuse Ron. He pulled out his crystal ball, cradled it in one hand, closed his eyes, and concentrated. A hazy mist swirled inside, resolving into a clear image, the Gringotts Gate, then Harry, with Hermione and Hagrid nearby. Satisfied, Dylan put the crystal ball away. Harry's all right, he announced. He's with Hagrid and Hermione at the entrance to Gringotts. Let's go there. Ron nearly collapsed with relief. Thank goodness. Let's get moving. Arthur, who worked at the Ministry, had been anxious but pragmatic. If Dumbledore trusted Dylan's divination, and Ron insisted he did, then there was little to object to. They hurried off toward Gringotts, Ginny leading the way. She'd always been warned never to go to Nocturne Alley, so the idea that Harry might have been sent there made her especially frantic. At Gringotts, the family looked around, not immediately seeing Harry. Molly and Arthur shot questioning looks at Dylan. Calm, he explained. I divined the outcome, not their exact arrival time. We went straight to the destination. We should only start searching if we can't find them here. Before they could argue, Hagrid's large figure came into view. Harry stood beside him, walking toward them. Oh my goodness, Harry. Are you all right? Molly hurried forward and examined him. I'm fine, Mrs. Weasley, Harry said. I accidentally teleported to the wrong fireplace earlier. Sorry if I worried you. It's all right. You're safe. That's the important thing. Molly relaxed and fussed over him. Dylan greeted Hagrid, who nodded and rubbed his hands together, staring at Dylan as if about to say something. Dylan, hoping to keep Hagrid from blurting out anything about Beta, smiled and said lightly, Everything's been good. I'm staying with Ron. They've all been very kind. Hagrid scratched his head. That's good, he said. Harry and Ron exchanged a look. They both knew about Hagrid and Dylan raising a dragon together, but it wasn't something they'd spread around. A clear voice cut through the air. Hey, why are you all gathered here? Waiting for me? Hermione emerged from the entrance of Gringotts with a bag of exchanged money in her hand. Ron rolled his eyes and said, Why would we be waiting for you here? Chapter 117. I declare that Harry admires me. Gilderoy Lockhart. The cobblestones of Diagon Alley shimmered in the summer heat. Smack! No sooner had Ron finished speaking than Molly Weasley's freckled hand landed square on his unruly red hair. It didn't hurt, but the sound was sharp and unmistakable, loud enough to drown out the owl's complaints from the post office on the corner. Ron staggered back, clutching the back of his head. The vine patterns on Gringotts' bronze doors flickered beside his flushed ears. Mum, Molly glared. Who told you to speak to a classmate like that? And a lady, no less. Arthur, look at the son you've raised. Ron couldn't find a word to answer. Mr. Weasley bowed his head with the same sheepish expression as his son. Hermione stood to the side, lips twitching. A faint, almost guilty smile tugged at her face. She quickly tucked the curls at her temples behind an ear, pretending to smooth her hair, but the laughter in her brown eyes was obvious. She pressed her lips together and tried to compose herself, then turned politely to the Weasleys' visitors. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, she said crisply. Hello, my parents are right behind me. Mr. and Mrs. Granger stepped forward, and Hagrid loomed a little way behind them. The contrast was comical. Mr. Granger's neat collars and Mrs. Granger's sensible dress against Hagrid's mud-splattered moleskin coat, yet it added to the bustling, oddly charming scene. Hermione's voice, suddenly as crisp and precise as if she were reading from a history of magic text, enthusiastically introduced everyone. This is Harry, this is Ron, and this is Dylan, the top student in our year. These are Ron's parents, and this is Mr. Hagrid, one of Hogwarts' gamekeepers. Hello, hello, the Grangers answered politely. When they looked at Dylan, they hesitated for a beat, then smiled. Pleased to meet you, Dylan said with a bow. His hair caught a shaft of light through Gringotts' dome and shone with a faint halo. The couple exchanged a surprised look that silently said, "He's a bright lad." Dylan had no need to withdraw money at Gringotts, but Harry and the Weasleys did, so he went along. He'd never seen the subterranean vaults before. Hermione and her parents, having handed their money over earlier, joined the others in the goblin-driven cart at Hermione's invitation. The cart hurtled along the rock tunnels like a roller coaster. Hermione squealed with childish delight, clutching the rusty copper railing until her knuckles blanched. "Faster, at least 60 miles per hour!" she shouted, hair whipping into caramel curls. The cart plunged, sending Mrs. Granger's pearl necklace skittering in a silvery arc. Out in the vault, Molly Weasley carefully counted and patted down a modest pile of coins, stuffing each into a patched velvet pouch with the thoroughness of someone who'd made every nut count. The Weasleys' coins were small. Dylan peered into the open vaults and felt his envy flare when they reached Harry's. When the goblin swung open Harry's vault, golden light like melted sunshine poured out. Piles of galleons, silver sickles, and bronze nuts were stacked in neat tiers. The shine made Dylan's eyes ache. He felt, briefly and sharply, how small his own savings were in comparison. No use lingering, he told himself. Time to get my parents earning money quicker. He stroked his chin and thought of brewing potions to sell, maybe under Snape's name. Popular potions sold well, and potion-making talent ran in Harry's family. The Potters had money going back generations. Linford of Stinchcombe had invented useful brews like Skele-Gro and Wit Sharpening Potion, and Fleamont Potter had created Sleekeasy's Hair Potion, multiplying their fortune. Dylan's mind chased ideas, selling a bestseller potion, researching ways to short Gringotts, before he pushed them away and watched Harry, embarrassed among the Weasleys, scoop a handful of galleons and have the goblin shut the door again. Back above ground, the Weasleys' various shopping plans unfolded. Ron stared at Harry's leather bag, full of galleons, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to process it. "You should buy new socks," he blurted. "I will," Harry said, glancing down awkwardly. The group dispersed. Percy needed a quill, Fred and George were off to meet friends, Ginny needed school things, and Hermione had her list. Arthur Weasley seized the moment to show the Grangers a spark plug he'd secreted in his coat pocket and suggested a drink at the Leaky Cauldron, partly to talk about combustion engines, partly because he was curious about Muggle inventions. The Grangers were amused and agreed to reconvene at Flourish and Blot's in about an hour and a half. Dylan had little on his shopping list beyond textbooks, so when the sun checked out and the heat pressed down, he suggested ice cream. "Fukosco's has great cold treats," he said. "I know that place. Their strawberry is the best, and the chocolate nuts on top." Ron put his nose to the frost-sheathed display and breathed white circles against the glass, mistaking chocolate chips for some sort of magical insect. Hermione corrected him. "It's cocoa bean fragments, not cockroach crumbs," and Dylan leaned on the counter watching Fukosco drizzle blueberry sauce over a sundae. The syrup ran down the vanilla like shrinking potion, brewed in Snape's private lessons. With sundaes in hand, they bought parchment and ink. Hermione chose draft parchment altered with squid ink sacks that faded over 3 weeks, and paused at the Quidditch shop, where Ron and Harry talked brooms and game tactics. Time slipped by, then the group headed toward Flourish and Blot's. They arrived to find the bookstore's entrance jammed with people. A banner hung from the second-floor window, gold letters on red. "Famous wizard Gilderoy Lockhart is here signing copies of his autobiography, Magical Me." Every 10 seconds, Lockhart's name on the banner sent off a little burst of fireworks that dyed the air in streaks of gold. The crowd at the door buzzed with excited chatter. Hermione's eyes went wide. "We're lucky. We get to see Lockhart. He's so famous." Ron nodded. "He told us to buy his books for Defense Against the Dark Arts. Lots of them." Dylan, who'd spent a lot of time at the Weasleys, raised an eyebrow. Of course they'd run into Lockhart at Flourish and Blot's. He had the children's books from the list clutched in his arms. He intended to get them signed and maybe make use of the signatures later. As he squeezed into the bookshop, a massive composite portrait of Lockhart, one big image made from many smaller photographs, loomed over the stacks. Lockhart's smile shone from every frame, all dazzling teeth and gleaming white eyes. Dylan felt an almost ridiculous urge to recommend the man as a toothpaste spokesperson. Hermione's parents admired the picture, blinking at the brightness of those teeth. Hermione, impatient as ever, urged them to stop staring and insisted they read Lockhart's works. Every one of his books is brilliant. A shop assistant's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gilderoy Lockhart." Before Dylan could move forward for an autograph, the women around him surged, sweeping him backward with their elbows and handbags. He held 7 books like a stack of bricks and blinked. Are these people mad? What's so special about an autograph? Then Lockhart spotted Harry. "Oh, Harry Potter." Lockhart's eyes lit up. He reached into the crowd, took Harry by the shoulders, and dragged him forward into a flourish. Cameras clicked, and the crowd erupted into cheers and sharp, excited gasps. Harry's face registered bewilderment. He was used to attention, but not like this. Lockhart embraced him like a long-lost friend. "What a thrilling moment," Lockhart called, raising his voice until the shop fell into a hush. "Little Harry came to Flourish and Blots because he admires me and wants to buy my autobiography, Magical Me." He scooped up a pile of books. "Here you are, little Harry. Each copy comes with 10 of my personal autographs. Isn't that exciting?" Harry was about to say he didn't need any of it and wasn't excited in the slightest. Lockhart, however, was just getting started. And now, there's even more reason to be excited. When September comes, he paused for dramatic effect. "I shall be joining Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The crowd gasped as one. "Headmaster Dumbledore has invited me to teach Defense Against the Dark Arts," Lockhart continued, basking in the collective delight. "And I've at last agreed." He pushed Harry back into the crowd, took his seat at the signing table, and began to arrange his pens and glossy mugs. Cameras clicked, wands flashed, and the store was a whirlpool of ecstatic witches pressing forward for signatures. Outside, Ron had never even managed to get in, and when Harry was swept back into the press of bodies, he rejoined him, scratching his head. These people are crazy. Dylan, though, saw an opportunity. He'd bought all the required books and held them in his arms. He glanced at the stack Harry was carrying. The idea came fast and bright. One book yielding 10 autographs by Lord Voldemort's nose. That was brilliant. He stepped forward, eyes gleaming. "Hey, Harry, can you do me a favor?" he asked. Harry looked up, bleary and exhausted. "Huh? What? Can I swap the books in your arms with mine? Mine are new, too," Dylan offered. Harry hesitated for a second, then, overwhelmed and wanting to be helpful, held out his arms. "Here, they're all yours," he said, passing his stack over before he could properly think about it. Chapter 118, Malfoy Daddy? Come over here and get scolded. The oak floor of Flourish and Blots creaked under the pressure of the crowd. Dylan weaved between 2 chattering witches, tucking the ink-scented textbooks into Harry's arms. He had given Harry the set, textbooks they'd need once term started, so Harry wouldn't have to buy them again. At the same time, Dylan was slipping all of Lockhart's autographed copies into his spatial storage. Lockhart hadn't just handed Harry the required textbooks. He'd given away complete sets, each copy signed, 10 signatures per book. That added up fast. Dylan could read a different book every day in the restricted section for months with that many signatures. He grinned to himself. Brilliant. "Dylan, why do you want Lockhart's autographed books? Do you like him?" Ron asked, watching Dylan's pleased face. Dylan shrugged. "Whether he's handsome or not, doesn't matter." "Did you hear what he said?" Ron blinked. "What?" "He's going to be our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor." Dylan lowered his voice as Hermione rejoined them, having just got her own signature. Hermione's eyes lit up. "Really? Oh, that's wonderful. I was so excited when I heard." Harry blinked. "So you took his signatures because you want them?" Dylan grinned. "Sell them for a profit?" "How much could they fetch?" Dylan began, then Hermione interjected. "One signed book might be worth 10 or 100 times its price." Dylan froze. One book at 5 galleons multiplied 100-fold, 500 galleons. 10, 50, 100 copies. For a moment he fantasized about reselling, but he cooled down. Reselling was work, and the supply wouldn't be endless. Rarity drives value. He lowered his voice. "Actually, I need the signatures for another reason." Hermione tilted her head. "What for?" "You need a professor's permission to enter the restricted section," Dylan said with a soft chuckle. Ron and Harry widened their eyes. You're already thinking about the restricted section? Why does that sound so bad? Dylan asked. We couldn't sneak in before because we didn't have a signature. We got chased out by Madame Pince. Ron prodded the stack of hardcover books with his wand. The tiny portrait of Lockhart on a title page coquettishly blew a kiss. Harry felt suddenly uneasy about the gilded corners and Lockhart's image blinking at him. Don't worry, Dylan said casually. I have a plan. After hearing Dylan's goal, Ron and Harry decided they'd pick up extra signatures for him. Hermione stood close by, the cover of Travels with Ghouls dented from where her fingernails had dug in, bronze letters gleaming under the chandeliers. After a pause, she ventured, You don't seem very fond of him. Dylan lifted an eyebrow. Hermione noticed that? He smiled. I divined a few things. I saw the moment his tricks were exposed. He's a fraud, you'll see. Hermione looked confused more than skeptical. She'd read Lockhart's books and admired his prose, but she listened. They hadn't been talking long when a commotion split the bookstore, shouts and a crush of bodies. Hey, stop fighting! Don't touch him! Dylan's ears twitched. He and Hermione pushed through the crowd to the source. A bookshelf trembled and books swayed. Pushing forward, they saw Arthur Weasley tangled in a pile of Fantastic Beasts books, his face flushed. Lucius Malfoy stood with the cold arrogance of a man used to getting his way, his snakehead cane gleaming. Hagrid hovered between them, crumbs from a gingerbread man on his hand. Molly Weasley and Harry hurried over. Molly wanted to leave before things escalated. I've got the signatures. Let's go, she urged, trying to shepherd her family out, but no one would move. Dylan's eyes fell on Draco. The boy's usual sneer wavered when he spotted Dylan stepping from behind a shelf. An almost imperceptible panic flashed in his eyes and his dragonhide boot edged toward the exit. Father, Draco whispered. Lucius followed his son's gaze and fixed on Dylan. He scrutinized him coldly. Who are you? Mr. Hawkwood, Draco supplied quietly. Lucius's look sharpened. Was I asking you? Draco shut his mouth. Lucius turned back to Dylan, disdain clear. You're the little fellow the Hogwarts professors admire? He swept over Dylan and the Weasleys as if appraising inferior goods. To be seen with such riffraff, you won't amount to much. Dylan met Lucius's gaze calmly. You're right. I did get top marks last year and earned at least 300 points for Gryffindor, more than any other house. He let the sarcasm hang in the air. I thought my tutoring had done the trick, but apparently I failed to educate a certain student. Perhaps that's my fault. Draco's face went red. He gripped his robe sleeve so hard the silver mandrake embroidery crumpled. Dylan continued, cool and slightly amused. Sometimes I think it's just raw talent that doesn't need a family name to enhance it. Harry and Ron exchanged looks. The Weasleys stared in disbelief, this measured, polite boy now delivering barbs with deadpan flair. Lucius's expression soured. Anger flickered across his face, but he forced himself to remain composed. I'll remember you, he snapped. Dylan smiled lazily. Of course, I'm so memorable. Lucius recoiled as if stung. True magic is far more than school lessons, he hissed, and, with a disdainful flick of his cloak that sent a stack of medieval witchcraft volumes shuddering, he stalked away with Draco close behind him. The crowd breathed. Ron swallowed. Arthur looked bewildered, then laughed. Incredible. Lucius was driven off by a child. Molly's eyes widened. By a child? She turned to Dylan, astonished. Dylan, who didn't melt under attention the way Harry might, went shy for a moment, rubbing the back of his head. Sorry, did I make a scene? I'm not actually that extraordinary. Only Hagrid laughed out loud. You're proper brilliant. When the mall cleared, Ron leaned in and muttered, When Malfoy and my dad were arguing, Lockhart was asking a Daily Prophet reporter if they could put his name on it. Dylan had suspected as much. They finished their shopping and said their goodbyes. Dylan told Molly his parents were back from holiday, so he planned to return home. Molly protested, regretful that she wouldn't have him for a proper dinner, but Dylan promised to visit at the next holiday, if Ron invited him. Molly was certain Ron would. The twins bickered about whose bed Dylan would take the next time he stayed over, their usual noise filling the shop. Molly's sudden accusation that Dylan helped George and Fred tidy a room after an explosive prank made the twins shout in protest, and Dylan's grin widened. He didn't use flu powder to go home. docked immediately by the leaky cauldron, he took a bus instead and arrived at his family house to be welcomed by his parents. They sat together for a long while. Dylan told them about life at the Weasleys and how different a wizarding house felt. His parents, Hubert and Maeve, were fascinated and a little wistful. "Would we ever learn magic ourselves?" they asked. "Not now," Dylan said. "But when my potion research advances, maybe we can make potions that let non-magical people use magic, and many Muggle items can be enchanted. Perhaps you'd be able to use them one day." They brightened at the thought. After dropping his parents off, they went out again, trusting Dylan not to be disturbed while he worked. Dylan had already warned them he'd be researching things that needed privacy. In his room, he opened his suitcase and stepped inside the familiar clutter. During his recent experiments, he'd bred another brood of cockroaches. They wriggled in a dense swarm that made him slightly queasy. Spiders had multiplied too, a small nest rustling as they tore at the scraps Dylan had left. He scattered a handful of minced meat over the webs. The spiders swarmed. The other species he'd tried hadn't reproduced fast enough and had been culled during his first practice runs. "Not bad. Keep breeding," he murmured, tipping a generous portion of food to the roaches. When the numbers grew too large, he culled them, keeping the population under control. He lingered a while before starting his refinement task, then checked the achievement notification that had popped up after his little confrontation with the Malfoys. Message: "Congratulations! You have achieved a new achievement." Dylan clicked the icon and opened the achievement page. The new badge glowed softly, waiting. Chapter 119, Putreflorifera, Rotten Flower. Evil experiments before term starts. Achievement: Rebuke the foolish underlings. Description: The Malfoys are not your underlings yet, but they will be. You have fully embodied the majesty of a Dark Lord, rebuking them with no concern for their dignity. Unlock requirement: Scold Lucius. Achievement reward: Max level random dark arts +1. More dark arts? Gone was the panic from the first days after the system activated when he'd learned the 3 unforgivable curses at once. Now Dylan could draw max level dark arts from the system without blinking. He even felt a little thrill. "I wonder what I'll pull this time. Maybe I can use it on some other dark wizard I rob later." He accepted the reward. Instantly, the world blurred, and his consciousness felt flung into a vast, starless void. A single, pitch-black star hung above him, radiating a steady, malignant pressure. Dylan grinned. "Come on, hit me hard." He beckoned with a crooked finger. The black star fell like a meteor. It slammed over him, swallowing him whole, and when the sensation passed, he found himself standing in absolute stillness amid layered heaps of corpses. Faces were frozen in silent screams, limbs twisted into grotesque angles, some bodies dismembered with entrails exposed. Dark, dried blood clotted into black-brown crust on the ground. Dylan ignored the sour, rank stench and lifted his wand slowly. Impure earth blooms the soul, rotten remains transformed to flowers, by the decay of death, a parasitic spirit's method. Blood-red light hissed from his wand like slithering snakes. Where it touched the dead, the bodies convulsed. Black, twisted buds sprouted from eye sockets, nasal cavities, mouths, and wounds. The buds erupted, petals unfurling with faint white veins, revealing crimson glowing stamens. As the blossoms opened, decomposition accelerated exponentially. Skin split and sloughed away to reveal bluish-black muscle that turned to pus and dripped from bone. Even bone crumbled to dust with a soft rustle. In moments, the corpses had become nothing but black, odorless soil, scraps of clothing and scattered bone shards. The ground now rooted through with a field of black flowers that swayed with a chill of death and rebirth. Dylan stood amid that bloom, his black robe fluttering in an oddly beautiful silhouette. Message: "Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level magic, Putreflorifera, Rotten Flower." He withdrew his gaze from the system panel, eyes alight. This spell, like Fiendfire, can dispose of bodies? Fiendfire would still be the fastest way to eliminate remains, but Putreflorifera had other uses. These black flowers could be harvested as reagents. He rubbed his chin and turned to the sealed enclosure of cockroaches. The mass of insects rustled, their oily carapaces flashing in the dim light. "Crucio!" A white flare shot from his wand. Dylan had recently bought a custom color effect for his wand, 1,000 galleons gone, but he could afford it. The pile of cockroaches convulsed, their antennae flailed, and spiky legs scrambled. Because cockroaches have multi-chambered hearts, the agony was exaggerated. Almost half went slack and died within moments. Putreflorifera! He swept his wand again. A purplish-black light washed over the corpses, and tiny black flowers pushed up through the mass. Dylan sniffed one. A faint, sweet scent clung to it. The surviving cockroaches, previously panicked, turned toward the blossoms as if drawn. They swarmed, antennae probing, some biting at petals. He watched, intrigued. A larger roach reached a flower first, tasted, and began to change. Its body swelled visibly from thumb size toward the thickness of a middle finger. The carapace hardened and darkened, looking much thicker, and the creature's speed and aggression increased. The smaller roaches were knocked aside by its charges. "So these flowers stimulate biological growth," Dylan murmured. He moved closer, fascinated. If that effect was reliable, he could make a lucrative new potion. There were questions. Were the changes permanent or temporary? Would flowers grown from one corpse only work on the same species? He suppressed the cockroaches that surged toward the petals with a casual spell. They scattered. Wait, did I just crush them by accident? He had, and wondered if flowers could still form from pulverized corpses. He tried it. Buds sprouted from the powder anyway. Not bad. He collected the floating black flowers and pulled out the roaches that had eaten them, placing the enlarged ones into separate petri dishes. He'd be busy. Spell refinement, magical cultivation, potion research, and everyday reading progress he refused to miss. The trouble of happiness, he thought. Knowledge accrued, magic sharpened. The satisfaction was addictive. Days slid by until it was nearly time for term. Dylan emerged from his briefcase. The 100,000 cubic meter interior had been fully repurposed. Bookshelves filled most of the space. A smaller area was a laboratory partitioned into sections. One section held dense packs of cockroaches. Another held spiders, clinging upside down in webs or scuttling between anchors. The third was his experimental bench, stacked with petri dishes, some housing large-bodied roaches and spiders, others full of black flowers. The fourth and most striking section held a huge transparent tank of murky and fairy water, cold mist rising from its surface. Dylan had transfigured the tank and enchanted it to hold its shape. The water within had been produced by his Return of the Dead research. Return of the Dead didn't simply bring corpses back as they were. Corpses needed immersion in inferi water to become inferi. Many insect bodies moved sluggishly in the tank. Prolonged immersion had swollen them, dulled their exoskeletons, and made their motions stiff. Dylan casually dropped a few live cockroaches in. The soaked, prepared spider and fairy opened compound eyes, now glowing scarlet with a black pistol light, surrounded and pinned the live roaches to the bottom until they died. Then, after a short time in the water, the dead rose and moved again, resurrected, part of his inferi insect force. Inferi water has to be continually fed living creatures to sustain itself, otherwise it will evaporate, he noted. He'd poured enormous effort into producing what he had, and it had plateaued. More inferi water required more corpses, and his insect supply was limited. He had to balance using bodies for spell refinement with reserving some for growing black flowers. The black flowers themselves were ephemeral, not as brief as an epiphyllum, but they lasted only a day. After that, their energy dispersed. He'd lost a lot of material early on. Even the enlarged roaches that had eaten petals shrank back after the flower died, though not completely to their original size, suggesting the consumed energy faded with the petals. He poked at a palm-sized roach in a dish and used tweezers to lift a molted exoskeleton. The discarded shell now shone with a metallic sheen like mithril. When he dipped it into inferi water, ice crystal runes condensed on the surface. Remarkable, he breathed. His experiments showed the flower's energy was corrosive. Insects became listless as the effect waned. When they had just eaten, they appeared manic, as if instinctive drives had been stimulated. Those negatives would need solving if he wanted a marketable potion, retain the growth without the corrosive or the madness. More than anything, though, Dylan felt a living power in these flowers, an energy that suggested more than mere growth. After reading the Jewish Book of Abraham and failing to make a philosopher's stone, he'd gained insights into immortality research. Putrefloriferous energy might, with continuous extraction, have value akin to unicorn blood or other ingredients for longevity research. He cleaned his bench and surveyed his lab with satisfaction. He was a wizard conducting wicked, grotesque, even repulsive experiments, but to him it was pure research. Corpses were tools. Dark arts were just magic. He had no dark turn in mind beyond his studies. Tomorrow's the first day back. I'll need to ask Mum and Dad for more money and a regular allowance after term starts. He left the briefcase and lay on his bed, thinking about how he wanted to reconfigure the pet space. Part necromancy lab, part habitat for pets and magical creatures. Maybe 2 areas. He needed room for more catches and for Coalball and Beta to have bigger activity zones. It all came down to money. Still too poor, he sighed. A silver crescent moon sprinkled frost on the bed as the attic clock struck 10. Dylan's potion-stained fingers traced a silver-green rune in the air. The fabric shimmered, and Coalball slipped through the distortion. The black fur was sleek, tail held high, amber eyes flickering like small fires in the lamplight. "How have you and Beta been?" Dylan asked, having neglected his pets while buried in research. He planned to spend the evening with Coalball. Coalball blinked, gave an aloof squint, then, realizing Dylan was smiling, patted into his lap and curled into a fluffy bundle. Dylan smiled, stroked soft fur, and let sleep close in. The scent of pine night air drifted through the window. As the last sliver of consciousness faded, he felt Coalball press his head against the Drought of Living Death chapter of Advanced Potion Making. In the book's illustration, the moonflowers were quietly opening, bathed in moonlight. It was the first day of term. Dylan woke early. The Hogwarts drove him to King's Cross. "Be careful, dear." Maeve smoothed the wrinkles from his robe collar. The protective charms on her pearl earrings glowed faintly blue in the morning light. Dylan had enchanted them for her himself, with his father helping out. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll be fine. You two don't play around too much and earn some money. I have a lot of research that needs funding," he said with a smile. "This is the 25th time you've said that," Hubert said resignedly. "Don't worry, son. Your mother and I will make sure you're looked after." "Hey, I believe in Dad's strength." Dylan waved goodbye and pushed his luggage trolley toward platform 9 3/4. A mist, tinged with coal smoke from the steam engine, clung to the platform. The train was already there, but Dylan looked up and down and couldn't spot the Weasleys, Harry, Ron, Ginny, anyone. He paced the platform twice, but still no sign of them. I reminded them, how could they be late? A pocket watch peeked from his cuff, its silver chain swinging as he moved, but he wasn't going to stand around waiting. He found an empty compartment near the platform, sat down, and took out Lockhart's latest book, intending to skim it. He ran his wand over the cover once more to silence the author's preening portrait, one temporary silencing charm, and then began to read. Lockhart was a shallow braggart, but he knew a skilled memory charm and was a clever self-promoter. Otherwise, he wouldn't have collected all those adventures. Dylan skimmed, noting the gaps where Lockhart couldn't pry the truth out of people. He didn't plan to study the book closely. Mostly it was self-congratulation anyway. Thanks to an earlier reward called accelerated reading, Dylan could take in several lines at a glance and grasp the meaning quickly, and as his mental ability improved, so would his speed. He read the line about the moonstone on the Snowman King's crown being a replica from Diagon Alley shop number 93, and the original being supposedly in Lockhart's possession, and he scoffed, using his quill to annotate the passage with a single wet, bold nonsense. The train's whistle gave a long blast. Time slipped by, and the train began to move. Dylan looked up just in time to see the Weasleys hurtling through a pillar onto the platform. "Merlin's beard!" Molly Weasley cried, startling the owl in the cage beside her. She clutched Ginny by the collar while waving her wand in the other hand to keep 5 suitcases juggling in the air. She sent them hurtling onto the carriage with a flurry of charms. Ginny's secondhand textbooks spilled from an overstuffed trunk. Fred quickly levitated them and muttered a cleaning charm to calm the rustling pages. Through the window, Dylan heard Molly's anxious voice. "Quick, get on." Percy's hair was unusually untidy, and his prefect badge sat crooked on a crumpled robe. He tried to smooth his sleeves with a quick charm, but the train was already pulling away. Panting, he shepherded his siblings into the carriage. Ginny shoved aboard under Molly's direction, and then Percy turned to hurry to the prefect's carriage. Dylan caught Molly's eye and gave a polite wave. She looked surprised to see him, but couldn't stop. She managed a tired smile and waved back, then froze as if remembering something else. The train lurched and began to pull away. Dylan left the compartment door open for the moment and heard Percy mutter in a stiff voice, "Unbelievable. They missed the Hogwarts Express because they were playing around." Percy pushed the twins and Ginny into the compartment, noticed Dylan sitting there, and deposited them as best he could. "Sit here. I'm going to the prefect's carriage," he said, stuffing the twins' luggage inside and fixing his tie with a transfiguration charm. He shoved a few prank items into the gap between the seat cushions with trembling fingers and stalked off. Dylan glanced at the three of them and lifted Lockhart's book. "Why were you late? I'm almost finished with this." Fred and George exchanged a look and sighed. "We were ready, then problems on the way. Ron and Harry kept getting held up by things." "What did Percy mean by playing around?" Dylan asked. "We were out late playing wizard's chess," George said, scratching his head. "Dad got one for us to try out. We were messing about, and by the time we finished it was past midnight. No one could get up this morning, especially Ron and Harry. Mum said we'd better go on without them." "You play wizard's chess too?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "My dad insisted," Fred said. "Said he wanted us to play it first, and then he'd figure out how to make it more magical." "You lot are very carefree," Dylan said. Ginny, sitting quietly, looked worried. "Will we lose house points?" "You haven't even been sorted yet," Dylan teased. "You might not even be in Gryffindor." "I'll definitely be in Gryffindor," Ginny replied earnestly. "All right," Dylan said, patting her head. "I think you will be too. Harry and Ron will probably cause trouble, but I don't think they'll cost Gryffindor points. Maybe a detention." Ginny froze. "Maybe? I'm going to read for a bit. I claimed this compartment. Sit here or go play with friends." Dylan lowered his head, the book already opening on his lap. The twins nodded obediently. "Ginny, sit tight. Dylan will look after you." No sooner had they spoken than Fred and George were out of the compartment door, off again to cause mischief. Dylan watched them go and smiled faintly. The carriage's oak paneling glowed honey gold in the sunlight. A page of the book on his lap had a bubble of non-stick bubblegum stuck to one corner, George's handiwork. Ginny sat curled into the seat, the cuffs of her robe rumpled from fidgeting. Sunlight hit the freckles across her nose. She noticed the gum and looked a little embarrassed. "Sorry about them," she said. Dylan shook his head. "It's non-stick bubblegum, easy to remove. They wouldn't stick proper chewing gum on my book." Ginny hesitated, then asked softly, "Are you strict? Fred and George act like they're a bit scared of you." Dylan smiled. "Do I seem strict?" "No," Ginny said after a moment. "I think you're very kind and thoughtful, much more than my brothers." "Thanks. I'll accept that." He flicked his wand and conjured a steaming cup of hot cocoa for her, then pulled a rainbow-shimmering candy from his pocket. "Want a fizzing Whizbee? Fred made these. He put a little surprise in one, but don't worry, you won't turn into a frog this time." Ginny's cheeks warmed as she took the candy. Her fingertips brushed the calluses on Dylan's hand, the kind left by long practice with a wand. The candy wrapper fluttered into the shape of a tiny robin and then settled back into itself. Dylan tapped his wand and steadied Ginny's trunk, which had begun to slide. Through a gap, she could see a second-hand standard book of spells, grade 1, with the faded name Roger Davies on the spine. "They ran off without helping me with my trunk," Ginny pouted. "If it broke, Mum wouldn't have the money to buy a new one." "Your robes look nice," Dylan said. "Are they new?" "Yes, Mum made this one for me. She said she'd send another later." Ginny looked pleased as she smoothed her robes and then sat back. Dylan smiled, and with another light flick of his wand, produced a small gift box inlaid with moonstone patterns and set it on the little table between them. At that exact moment, the gum that George had left turned into a small emerald frog and plopped into Ginny's cocoa. She squealed. "They left an extra surprise," she said. Dylan narrowed his eyes at the twins' handiwork, then waved his wand and sent the frog flying harmlessly out the carriage door. He tapped the gift's anti-theft charm. The box opened like a silver-blue lotus, revealing 3 new school robes for girls, their sleeves swaying with the train's movement. "These are for me?" Ginny's eyes widened. "If you consider me your brother," Dylan said, smiling, "then take them. Girls should have new robes." Logic warred with gratitude in Ginny's face. She didn't usually take presents lightly, but the robes were already there and obviously not for Dylan to wear. She accepted them, cheeks flushed, and thanked him. For the rest of the journey, she sat opposite him quietly, watching the countryside fly by. A moment later, the compartment door slammed open and the twins popped their heads in. "Dylan! Look outside! It's Harry! It's Harry and them!" Through the window, a Ford Anglia lurched past, flying low and swaying as it kept pace with the train. Ginny's hand lingered on the gift box. As the car dipped closer, Dylan caught sight of who was inside, only Harry and Ron. Ginny's mouth fell open. "No mum? No dad?" "You guessed right," Dylan said. "They're not in it." Ginny's hands fluttered. "Oh my goodness, will they be all right? They were allowed to drive themselves?" The twins, for once, were not worried. They stared at the wobbling car with awe and envy. "They're cheating," George said. "They didn't even take us." "They're going to show off in front of the whole school," Fred said. "And they didn't let us have the chance." The car flew on, crossing snowy peaks and then diving into cloud where it was lost from sight. Dylan was calm. He knew Harry and Ron would be all right, and he returned to his reading. The twins vanished to find some new trouble. Ginny stayed anxious, stealing glances out the window, worrying for the 2 she knew. The train moved through ever more fantastic landscapes until finally Hogwarts appeared. The students bustled down the platform and made their way across the lake. After the boats, more murmurs ran through the crowd. Ginny kept looking back, hoping for another glimpse of the flying car. None came. Dylan and Neville stayed together as they joined the others. Ginny and the first years waited outside the Great Hall while Dylan and Neville went inside and found the Gryffindor table. As the sorting ceremony began, Hermione arrived and hurried over to them. Even as new students filed in and the sorting hat called houses one by one, she hadn't seen Harry or Ron and couldn't help asking, "What's going on? Where are they?" Dylan kept reading and shook his head. "They'll show up soon. Don't worry." Hermione's mouth twitched. The more he said it, the more she worried. She scanned the teacher's table and noticed Professor Snape's seat was empty. Her mind jumped to the flying car they had seen. Could it be related? She peered at the doorway nervously. Throughout the sorting, Professor McGonagall worked briskly, and when Snape finally strode in, wrapped in his robes and whispering to McGonagall, her pleasant expression tightened. She seemed to speed the process up, putting the hat on each first year more quickly than usual. Gryffindor, next. Hufflepuff, next. Slytherin. Then, with the last new student sorted, McGonagall exchanged a look with Dumbledore and left the hall with Snape at her side. Dumbledore gave his usual opening speech, introduced the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and then stepped away from the high table. Hermione watched him go and sighed. It was just the start of term, and she already felt as if Gryffindor's points were doomed. "I hope I can make up for any losses in my exams," she muttered. After the feast, the prefects led their houses back to common rooms. Ginny trailed after Percy, glancing back for Dylan. When she caught his eye, he nodded, and she hurried off with her roommates to get ready. Dylan returned to his dormitory alone, Neville lagging behind to chat with Hermione. Soon after, Harry and Ron burst into the common room. Many students were still gathered there, catching up, and when the pair arrived, the chatter stopped and everyone swarmed them. "Hey, Harry, you two didn't get expelled, did you?" No, we weren't expelled. We didn't lose any house points," Harry and Ron protested, explaining their misadventure at some length until Percy, looking severe, intercepted them. They squeezed out of the crowd and pushed through to the dormitory where Dylan sat alone, reading. "Merlin's pants, Dylan. I wish I could be as relaxed as you," Ron wailed, slumping down on a bed. "You can't imagine what kind of punishment we got," he added, eyes wide as he began to tell the story.